This video is a 3-hour compilation of the worst human deaths. From astronauts who suffered painful deaths all the way to parents who were stabbed to death by their own daughter's boyfriend. Yeah, so let's just get right into it. Let's talk about some astronauts who suffered painful deaths. In, well, space of course. Starting with the Space Shuttle Columbia disaster. This story is about a space shuttle that was supposed to return home safely, but instead became a disaster that burned the whole crew inside alive, where their bodies then smashed into the ground. Yeah, let's rewind to January 16th, 2003. Columbia, the oldest space shuttle in NASA's fleet, is sitting on the launch pad at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The mission, a scientific research flight. 7 astronauts were ready to do 80 experiments in space. They say they wanted to study what happens to microbiological processes in the absence of gravity. Whatever the hell that means. I like your little funny words, Magic Man. Anyways, let's get into who is actually on the space shuttle. First, we have Commander Rick Husband, a pilot who was well at the wheel. With him was pilot William McCool, and also mission specialist Michael Anderson. And then we have Ilan Ramon, who was Israel's first astronaut, and keep this in the back of your mind because it's really important. We also have Kalpana Chawla, David Brown, and Laurel Clark. This wasn't just any crew, these were some of the biggest, nerdiest, brainiest minds on the planet. Now, what exactly caused their painful deaths? It has been months of prep work, training, and planning until it was finally go time. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Blah blah, you get the goddamn point. You guys have ever seen a rocket take off? I don't need to explain it to you. Well, during this launch, a piece of foam insulation from the big orange fuel tank actually broke off and struck Columbia's left wing. A bit of foam? What the hell, Boxhead? What? That's not a big deal. So you would think. But in the world of space travel, even the smallest inch can be a massive problem. Yes, size matters here. Now, here's the interesting part. NASA engineers actually did in fact notice this. They saw the footage of the foam hitting the wing, but here's the thing. They didn't think it was that big of a deal. A piece of foam hitting a large metal rocket, I mean, who cares? Now, wait. I take that back because some of the engineers were concerned. They knew that if the heat-resistant tiles on the wing were damaged, it could mean a disaster during re-entry. I mean, when something flies into the atmosphere, if you guys didn't know this, it burns up like crazy. So they need all the protection they can get. But did anyone listen? Let's just say, not really. They asked for satellite images to assess the damage, but the request was denied. Yeah, denied. The higher-ups at NASA in charge of the safety inspections, or the mission management team, thought that the risk was low and they decided to carry on with the mission as planned. Hey, what's more expensive, the whole ship and crew or some satellite pictures, huh? Hey, it's tax dollars, who cares? Man, wait, what's that over there? Is that War Thunder? War Thunder, the most comprehensive vehicle combat multiplayer game ever made, that drops you into the chaos of battle with unmatched realism and scale. Command an arsenal of iconic military vehicles, stuff like tanks, aircrafts, helicopters, and warships, spanning from the mid-20th century to cutting-edge modern prototypes. War Thunder lets you define your own playstyle, deploy advanced military tech like guided missiles, thermal vision, and even nuclear strikes to turn the tide of a battle. Also, say goodbye to health bars. War Thunder's unique damage model brings every hit to life. The X-ray damage effect makes every shot a tactical decision. Now wait, let me tell you about the recent Storm Warning update. The game now supports ray tracing, fully realistic shadows, lighting, and reflections. Also, there are new advanced military vehicles introduced. Jets, Eurofighter Typhoons, and Rafale plus M44 for ground combat. And many more, Boxheads. Even go ahead and test these new toys out on the new map Attica. Ladies and Boxheads, download War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox by using the cute little link in the description. All new players and those who haven't played War Thunder for half a year or more will receive some special bonuses. 100,000 Silver Lions, a special decorator Eagle of Valor, and more. And you can also dive into the action on War Thunder Mobile.
Download it on Android and iOS, a link is also in the description, people. Now let's get back into the video.
For 16 days, the Columbia crew was busy doing what astronauts do best: nerd. They were conducting experiments on everything from the behavior of flames in microgravity to how spiders spin webs in space. I mean, spiders in space? That's either the coolest goddamn thing I've ever heard, or it's either the creepiest. But yeah, they were up there doing their thing and the world watched. And for a while, it seemed like another successful NASA mission. Families of the astronauts were happy and excited, knowing that their loved ones up there were doing amazing and big things. And the rest of us, well, we're just happy to see some space stuff. I mean, you don't really get to see that every day. The ship did its thing, the astronauts performed their experiments, and talked to the ground. I'm sure while they were up there, they actually learned a lot about what happens in the lack of gravity and all that, you know, the nerd that my box brain is way too small to understand. But then, after 2 weeks of all going to plan, the worst happened. February 1st, 2003. Columbia was scheduled to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere and land safely back at the Kennedy Space Center. But as the shuttle made its dive into the Earth, something went horribly wrong. And the crew actually noticed that something was going wrong. Colonel Rick Husband said on the mic, and I repeat, "Roger, Those were his last words. At 9 o'clock, as the shuttle entered the atmosphere, the damaged left wing allowed superheated air to penetrate the wing structure. The heat-resistant tiles, which were supposed to protect the shuttle, had been damaged from the deadly foam. And what happened next? The wing started to disintegrate, ripping apart and then... Yeah, you heard me correctly, and it was so fast, it was 18 times the speed of sound. That's not just fast, that's goddamn zooming. And to be torn apart at that speed, the destruction was almost instant. Almost too quick to even comprehend. I mean, guys, 1 minute they were coming home and the next, they were gone. Now hold on, how could this happen? How could NASA let this slip through the cracks? As you would expect, investigations began immediately. The Columbia Accident Investigation Board was formed to find out what went wrong. And whoo, did they find some things. The foam strike was identified as the cause of the disaster, but it was actually more than that. NASA itself had ignored the warnings and 7 innocent people paid the price. Not only that, but remember that Israeli astronaut, Ilan Ramon? Well, him being on board made people think that this could have been a terrorist attack. No, seriously. Remember, this was shortly after 9/11, so America was terrified that that's what it was. But ladies and boxheads, the investigation showed that the only terrorist here was the goddamn foam. Alright, now let's talk about Soyuz 11. This next one wasn't American. Remember in those early days, the space race was on between the Americans and the Soviets. June 1971, picture this. The Cold War is in full swing. The United States and the Soviet Union are neck and neck, each trying to outdo the other with everything. And then we have Soyuz 11. A mission that was supposed to be a historic success, but turned into one of the most tragic events in space history. Maybe I should start saying space exploration history, because isn't like history everywhere in space? You know what I'm saying? I'm on a tangent. Let me set the stage for you. The Soviet Union had already achieved the first satellite, the first human in space, you name it. They were kicking America in the goddamn... Now they were about to pull off another first, manning the world's first space station, Salyut 1. Great, thought America. Before 11, the Soyuz 10 mission was a mission to attempt the docking before, but failed to dock with the station due to technical issues and they returned home. Woohoo! Cheered the Americans as they f***ed it up. Soyuz 11 was the Soviet Union's second attempt at this. The plan was simple: dock with Salyut 1, spend a few weeks conducting scientific experiments, and return home as heroes of the motherland, comrades. It's our space shuttle, comrades. The crew of Soyuz 11 was 3 astronauts: Commander Georgy Dobrovolsky, flight engineer Viktor Patsayev, and research engineer Vladislav Volkov. These guys were the cream of the crop, or the vodka of the vodka? I don't really know what Russians do other than drink vodka. But then again, what does America do? I don't know. June 6th, 1971. Soyuz 11 approached the Salyut 1 station. They held their breath as they got closer. Tick, tock. Closer still. The moment of truth. The astronauts adjusted the module and got closer. Click. They had successfully docked with Salyut 1. This was a huge win for the Soviets. The crew entered the space station and began their mission. For 23 days, they conducted experiments on what happens to bone density when people stay in space for a while. They watched the Earth from the orbit, measured sun wavelengths from space, and even broadcasted for live TV from space. I mean, imagine going live from a space station in 1971. Like a goddamn 1970s Twitch stream. Hey, what's going on, chat? Today we're going to be doing a Let's Play of America in the space race. Thanks for the 3-month sub, Cuba. Really appreciate it. Anyways, things weren't really all that smooth. Salyut 1 had some serious issues. Technical malfunctions, problems with air quality, you goddamn name it. First was the failed docking of the Soyuz 10. Then, once the crew of 11 were on board, they started noticing a weird smell. On the station, the filters were malfunctioning and causing a strange smell throughout the station, which is what they were smelling. More than that, the power supply kept going out, which was a constant issue with their experiments for measuring the sun's wavelengths. But the crew pushed on, determined to complete their mission. One thing the Russians are great at is pushing through some shitty goddamn conditions. Every country that's ever tried to invade them in the winter had a bad time. But then the time came to return home. June 29th, 1971. Soyuz 11 undocked from Salyut 1 and began its descension back to Earth. Everything seemed normal. The crew was calm, the spacecraft was functioning as expected, and the world was kicked back and watching from home. You know, watching them come back home. But then during re-entry, the most dangerous time besides takeoff actually, things went horribly wrong. A loud sucking noise is heard. Air is rapidly sucked out. The men gasped for air. Come in, come in! Nothing. The rescue teams were on high alert and made their way to the module. What they found was absolutely horrifying. A cabin vent valve designed to equalize pressure when landing, which, by the way, don't worry, I didn't know what that was either, accidentally opened in the vacuum of space. Hey guys, you mind if I crack a window? God damn it, Jerry. In less than 30 seconds, all of the air in the capsule vented into space. The astronauts, without their pressure suits because, you know, no one expected the cabin to depressurize, were instantly exposed to the vacuum of space and died instantly. Now let's just pause here for a second. Imagine that, sitting in a spacecraft thinking you're minutes away from home and then poof, all the air is gone just like this. As Soyuz 11 descended through the atmosphere, ground control tried to make contact with the crew, but there was no response, just silence. The capsule landed in Kazakhstan, and recovery teams rushed over to open it. The rescue teams opened the door, it slowly opened. The rescue teams looked inside. Oh my great heavens, one probably said. It was horrible. All 3 of the astronauts were dead. Strapped in their seats, their faces looked like frozen skeletons with their skin sucked to the bone, with obviously signs of suffocation from space. The Soviet Union was devastated. The loss of the astronauts was a blow not to just the space program, but to the nation as a whole. But Bach says, seriously, these guys gave their lives for the advancement of human knowledge, so to me, they're heroes. And again, most of us watching this video probably sit around on our couch and eat glue. These men are goddamn heroes. Now let's talk about the Challenger explosion. January 28th, 1986. Another group of American astronauts would die horribly. And on live TV, a day that many of our parents probably still remember. All of a bit too well. The Challenger mission was one of many shuttle missions that had become almost routine for NASA. No big deal, kick back, easy kind of stuff. This was supposed to be the 25th shuttle mission, and the first ever to include a regular civilian. What could go wrong there? And by the way, her name was Krista McAuliffe. She was a school teacher that was supposed to be a part of the crew in space. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. It sounds a bit crazy, I know. A teacher in space? What the? The idea was to show kids going to space was something you could aspire to do, no matter who you were. Oh, don't worry, NASA. After watching this video, I don't want to go to space anymore. I'm perfectly good on the ground. Anyways, let's talk about the crew of 7, who was Commander Francis R. Scobie, pilot Michael J. Smith, mission specialist Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, and Judith Resnick, payload specialist Gregory Jarvis, and of course, our teacher Krista McAuliffe. Now let's talk about the build-up. So, the Challenger launch had already been delayed multiple times due to bad weather and technical issues. Should have just taken the message. And then, on the morning of January 28th, temperatures at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida had plummeted to below freezing. Yeah, and if you live under a rock, Florida doesn't usually get that goddamn cold. So here's the thing, the cold was actually a big deal. The shuttle's solid rocket boosters were sealed with what are called O-rings. Yeah, I don't know what that means either, so let's take a look at the wiki, shall we? They're rubber gaskets that were supposed to prevent hot gases from escaping during the launch. For those that didn't know, the rockets get very warm. Some say they get to at least 100 degrees. But these O-rings weren't tested for such cold conditions. Yeah, none of these boys look great in the cold, if you know what I'm saying. Bad time. Engineers from Morden Thiokol, the company that actually manufactured the boosters, were even goddamn concerned. They had warned NASA that the O-rings could fail in the cold. So, what did our trusty guys at NASA do? They probably debated, they probably yelled, discussed, and all in the end it didn't matter because they decided to go ahead with the launch. Bunch of nerds in a circle. Oh yeah, you're so smart? No, you're so smart. Nah, bro, close your eyes, bro. Okay, bro. What do you see, bro? Nothing, bro. That's my world without you, bro. That's probably how it went, bro. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is the nerds were under some pressure to keep to the schedule. The desire to maintain public and political support all played a role in the decision. So here we are, January 28th, 1987, 11:38 EST. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The world watched as Challenger lifted off into the clear blue sky. Families, friends, and millions of viewers were glued to their TVs, especially the students, eager to see a teacher, Krista McAuliffe, make history. And well, because they're in this video, they definitely made history. For the first 73 seconds, everything seemed to be going according to plan. But then, at an altitude of 46,000 feet, something went horribly wrong. A plume of flame appeared, a sign that the O-rings had just failed. Just as the engineers had feared. The external fuel tank erupted, more flames, and then kaboom! The world watched the disintegration of the entire shuttle. The Challenger exploded in a massive fireball, and all that was left were pieces of debris falling into the Atlantic Ocean. The entire crew was killed instantly. The crew compartment was seen tumbling through the sky, and then it was gone, just like that. In an instant, 7 lives were lost. The Challenger disaster was broadcasted live, meaning millions of people, including children, witnessed the explosion in real time. Ask your parents about it, they will look like this guy right here. Not a pretty sight. In the hours and days that followed, the families of the crew were left to deal with the loss of their loved ones. President Ronald Reagan was scheduled to give his State of the Union address that evening. But instead, he addressed the nation about this tragedy. This was the exact quote, actually.
The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave.
NASA immediately grounded the shuttle program and launched an investigation into what actually went wrong. The Rogers Commission was formed, led by former Secretary of State William Rogers. The investigation revealed the O-rings had indeed failed, as the engineers had warned. The cold weather had allowed hot gases to escape and cause the explosion. But it wasn't just a technical failure. It was also a failure of management and communication. NASA had been warned, but those warnings were ignored once again. I mean, we're seeing a trend here. Richard Feynman, in his famous demonstration during the hearings, actually dipped an O-ring into a glass of ice water, which in fact showed how the rubber lost its flexibility in the cold. Oh, the audience. Okay, last one. So in the end, what came of all this? The Challenger disaster forced NASA to take a long, hard look at its practices, its culture, and its priorities. By the way, I forgot to mention the shuttle program was grounded for nearly 3 years. The disaster also led to changes in how risks were communicated and assessed within the organization. And before we move on to the next section, let's not forget that Krista McAuliffe was a civilian. She wasn't even supposed to be on the space shuttle. Gosh. Alright, next up we have Apollo 13. Now, I know the rest of the stories everyone died, but this one's a little bit different. Sue me if you think it's clickbait. April 1970. Apollo 11 had already made history by landing the first humans on the moon. Well, if it's real. And Apollo 12 followed with another successful moon landing. So, ladies and box heads, let's do a little bit of math. What's next? Apollo 13, of course. I mean, they did it twice before, so how hard could it really be? Okay, so Apollo 13 was supposed to be the third mission to land on the moon. You know, with actual people on it. The crew was Commander Jim Lovell, Command Module Pilot Jack Swigert, and Lunar Module Pilot Fred Hayes. These guys were ready to explore the Fra Mauro region of the moon. Whatever that means, all of this is just moon to me. But what started as a scientific mission quickly turned into a fight for survival. April 11th, 1970, Apollo 13 lifted off from Kennedy Space Center. 10, 9, blah blah blah, you get it. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. But as you've probably guessed, things were about to go south, not as bad as the other stories cause those people died instantly. But it's still rough. Let's fast forward to April 13th, 1970. For the math impaired, that's 2 days into the mission. They were cruising through space and everything was chill. A vibe, as the youngins say nowadays. And then bang! An ocean tank in the service module exploded. And in case you didn't know, people need oxygen to survive. Imagine sitting in a spaceship over 200,000 miles from Earth and suddenly hearing a loud bang. Not exactly the sound you want to hear when you're in the vacuum of space, right? Then again, was there a real bang? I thought there was no sound in space. Are they lying to us about this? Okay, well, regardless of how they detected it, the explosion crippled the spacecraft. The oxygen levels fell, the power dropped, and the crew was left in the dark. Literally. The moon landing, yeah, that was out the window. And hold on, this is where the famous line comes in.
Houston, we have a problem.
Okay, quick side note, the actual quote was,
Hey, Houston, we've had a problem here.
let's be real, this version has a better ring to it. Either way, those words signaled the beginning of one of the most intense rescue missions in space history. So, here's the situation. 3 astronauts are now stranded in space. They have a damaged spacecraft and they're losing power, and with it, their air. It was a goddamn ticking time bomb up there. And the mission control team back in Houston had to figure out how to get these guys home alive. AAA doesn't do space coverage yet. We're not at that part of the business. Anyways, what was the first order of business? Figuring out how to use the lunar module, or for those who don't know what that is yet, it's what actually lands on the moon. Using that as a lifeboat. But that thing wasn't meant to support 3 people for a long period of time. But desperate times call for desperate measures. The crew shut down the command module to conserve power and moved into the LM. Now hold on, things weren't so bad to where it was time to eat a crew member yet, but you know, it was bad. It was cramped, cold, and the conditions were getting here. In a tiny spacecraft floating in the blackness of space, knowing that the smallest mistake could mean the difference between life and goddamn death. The crew had to navigate using only the stars and perform complex calculations by hand. Dude, I can't calculate my bills without a calculator. I died real quick up there. Mission Control, they were working, trying to come up with solutions to problems that they've never had to encounter before. Just when you thought things couldn't get worse, they did. Okay, no, the LM's life support system was designed to filter out carbon dioxide, but it was only equipped to handle 2 astronauts for a short period. With 3 astronauts on board, the CO2 levels started to rise, and fast. If you guys saw my cave video, you'll see why a large group of people in an enclosed area is bad for breathing. The ground team had to come up with a way to fit a square peg in a round hole. Literally. The command module had a square component for the airlines, and the lunar module had round ones. So what did they do? They used duct tape, plastic bags, and a sock to rig a device that would literally allow the square scrubbers to fit into the round holes. And guess what? It worked. The crew was able to bring the CO2 levels down to a safe level. I mean, duct tape and a sock saved these guys' lives. That's not all I do with tape and a sock.
But hold on, it doesn't stop there. The next challenge? Alright, that's getting back to Earth. With the CM shut down, the crew had to conserve every bit of power that they had for re-entry. They faced freezing temperatures, water shortages, and exhaustion. So basically just life in Michigan. They also had to manually adjust their course using the LM thrusters, making sure they hit the narrow re-entry that would bring them safely back to Earth. Too shallow and they'd skip off the atmosphere and be lost in space forever. Too steep and they'd burn up on re-entry. No pressure, right? Imagine the intensity in the spacecraft, knowing that everything depended on this one maneuver. April 17th, 1970, the moment of truth. Almost a week of this. The crew powered up the CM, hoping it would still work after days of being shut down. The space shuttle rattled, alarms beeped, fire all around. I mean, the module literally looked like a damn meteor. Comms go down during this process for longer than usual.
Apollo, this is Mission Control. Do you read?
Waiting for a signal, any sign that the crew was still alive. Nothing. And then, hello Houston, this is Odyssey. It's good to see ya. Woo! Applause in the Mission Control. They made it. The crew of Apollo 13 arrived back on Earth safely in the Pacific Ocean, where they were quickly picked up by recovery teams. And honestly, isn't that just beautiful? So what's the takeaway here? Apollo 13 didn't make it to the moon, but it succeeded in ways that no one thought they could. It showcased honestly the best of NASA, and I spent most of this video bashing NASA, but I don't want to get it twisted. I think NASA is a great organization, so I wanted to end off on a good note. These are some of the worst nuclear disasters that did irreversible damage to the world and brutally killed thousands of people. Yeah, starting off with the SL-1 reactor explosion of 1961, where a routine operation turned catastrophic once a control rod mishap triggered a massive power surge in just about 4 milliseconds, resulting in the brutal deaths of 3 young operators at the scene. January 3rd, 1961, at the SL-1 reactor in the great state of Idaho. No one has ever called Idaho great. Okay, that's besides the point. Okay, now the SL-1 was a miniature nuclear reactor. It was experimental, created for the US Army to prove that these reactors could provide heat and energy for their, remote military base locations. Anyways, the Christmas and 1961 New Year holiday breaks had just come to an end after 11 days. And during this time, the reactor had been shut off for, maintenance. So, operators are returning to the reactor to power it back on. These operators were 3 young men, all in their 20s, who were more or less inexperienced, having only worked at the plant for about, a couple of months. And one of them for only just 3 weeks. These men were 27-year-old Richard McKinley, 22-year-old John Burns, and 26-year-old Richard Legg. So yeah, these guys are tasked with powering the reactor back on. To do this, they have to manually lift the center control rod of the reactor exactly 4 inches. And no more than that. Look, 4 inches is enough, guys, trust me here. Anyways, if they were for some reason to pull the control rod further than that, well, as we'll know soon, there could be an insanely dramatic power surge that could easily kill all of them in a second. The nuclear core would vaporize, control rods would shoot out of the vessel, and extremely pressurized radioactive water would fire out of the vessel at insane speeds. Not really a survivable situation. The men clock into work, but not in the best headspace. 2 of the operators, Richard Legg and John Burns, weren't exactly that friendly with each other. They apparently had some previous issues outside of work which led to some fistfights. So it's safe to assume they weren't all smiles and jolly when working together. And Richard McKinley wasn't exactly comfortable working with nuclear technology yet. Like I said earlier, at this point he was still a trainee at the reactor, having only been there for, again, 3 damn weeks. Man, I got talking stages that last longer than 3 damn weeks. Not to mention that night, John Burns had literally gotten a phone call from his wife asking for a divorce. Oh, good golly. This guy was not having a good day. So yeah, these guys all seemed totally ready to carry out this super risky and dangerous job that could literally mutilate their bodies in seconds, if not completed properly. They have a nice long list of tasks to complete as a part of powering the reactor back on, before the most important part, pulling out the damn rod. So when the clock strikes 9 p.m., completely exhausted, they make their way over to above the rods. John Burns would have the honor of pulling out, something I clearly never do. Okay, I'm done. Now Burns crutches down, preparing to lift the 80-pound rod. Richard Legg stands directly next to him, watching Burns and making sure nothing goes wrong. Needless to say, this guy's useless. Meanwhile, a nervous Richard McKinley stands off to the side. He paces in place as the other guys are near the rods. Remember, he's all new to this. He still feels uncomfortable with everything and is now worried something is gonna go wrong. 9:01 p.m. John Burns is hunched down, slowly lifting the heavy control rod upwards. Remember, 4 inches only. Anything past that is a death sentence, and all the men in the goddamn room knew it. He's lifting it, clank. The rod is goddamn stuck, which surprisingly happens quite a lot at this reactor. Hey, leggy boy, I can't move it, it's stuck. Well, then pull on the damn thing, ya boxhead. Remember, these guys hate each other? Their conversations probably went something like that. Anyways, so Burns continues to pull at the rod, this time with much more force, and probably without much care. He yanks on the control rod and it comes unstuck, but it's lifted way more than just 4 inches. Before the men even realize what happened, within just 4 milliseconds, the mutilated bodies of 3 men are suddenly laying on the ground and even on the ceiling. John Burns died instantly as he was thrown into a surface with such a force that his chest was fractured and a rib impaled his heart. Richard Legg had it the worst. His body was pinned to the damn ceiling. A control rod had flown out of the reactor vessel and struck Legg in his damn abdomen. With so much speed and power, the rod flew up to the ceiling while Legg was stuck up there, instantly killing him. Richard McKinley lays in a pool of blood as his hands and the right side of his face are completely blown off his body. Shockingly enough, he had survived the initial blast, but just barely. Unfortunately, he would die just a couple hours after the explosion. So what the hell just happened? How are these men dead and one barely alive within just 4 milliseconds? Well, when Burns lifted the control rod too far, the power within the core of the reactor surged to 10 million% more than typically operational. This caused the core of the SL1 reactor to melt and vaporize instantly. A pressure wave is produced inside the core and blasts upwards with extreme force. The top of the reactor vessel is struck with the pressure of 10,000 pounds per square inch. Now, the entire 26,000-pound reactor vessel is shot upwards at a crazy speed, lifting the entire rig out of the floor and up to 9 feet in the goddamn air. The control rods are all shot out of the vessel and towards the ceiling at 85 feet per second, which is exactly what impales and causes the death of Richard Legg. The heavily pressurized water and steam then shot out of the 6 holes in the reactor vessel, ultimately covering the whole room in radioactive debris from the damaged nuclear core. It was later determined that the force of this explosion was equivalent to about 70 pounds of TNT, all of which was blown right into the men's bodies, all within 4 milliseconds. Specific alarm patterns notify a group of firefighters about 8 miles away that something has gone wrong at the SL1 reactor. But these guys were not worried at all. They have already visited the reactor twice that evening as a result of false alarms. At 9:10 p.m., the firefighters show up without any real sense of urgency. They make their way towards the gates of the reactor when they notice that the radiation detectors are going crazy. To be safe, they put on some radioactive protective gear and enter the reactor building stairway at 9:17 p.m. Again, the radiation detector is blaring. With each step up the stairs, the detector ticks louder and louder. And still, these firefighters aren't taking this whole situation too seriously. They think that something must be wrong with the detector, so they go back downstairs to get a different one. Because, like, what could have possibly gone wrong at the reactor? Whew, boy, they're about to find out. The firefighters continue up the stairs and take a look around the corner and into the room. To their absolute horror, they saw the aftermath of the awful explosion that had occurred less than 20 minutes before. but no operators in sight. They now know that this situation wasn't to be taken lightly. Because of the incredibly high radiation levels, the firefighters couldn't enter the room just yet. They needed to retreat and think of a plan. They needed to be smart about how to approach this. At 10:45 p.m., they decide that each person can enter the building just once, and only for a maximum of 60 seconds. So, the first team of firefighters make their way up the stairs and quickly into the room of the explosion. Without even having time to express their disgust of the scene, they see the mutilated bodies of Burns and the somewhat alive McKinley. They were drenched in water, which happened to be incredibly contaminated by the radiation. Without hesitation, the firefighters put the men's bodies on stretchers and carried them out. Just 15 minutes later, at around 11 p.m., Richard McKinley succumbed to his terrible wounds and was pronounced dead. And what about Richard Legg? You know, the one on the ceiling. While Legg's body was so unrecognizable and mutilated that the firefighters initially thought that it was a pile of rags on the ceiling. To their shock, they eventually realized it was an actual person. Legg's body was going to be an incredibly tough recovery. Since it was pinned above the ceiling directly above the reactor core, the firefighters actually feared that the body could easily drop into the damaged core, which would result in the body being absolutely covered in a huge amount of radiation, creating a whole different problem. So, they let Legg's body hang on the ceiling for another 6 days. It wasn't until they gathered a group of 10 men with special tools to go in and recover his body. They took long poles with sharp hooks on the end into the room, ready to finally bring him down. With caution, the men were incredibly careful not to mess this whole ordeal up. They pierced Legg's body with the hooks and let the lifeless clump of body parts fall onto a stretcher below. The bodies of the 3 unfortunate men were placed in lead-lined caskets inside of metal drums and buried in the Idaho desert, basically in the middle of goddamn nowhere. And what about the reactor? Well, after the incident, most of the radiation had thankfully been contained inside the reactor building. This allowed for a much easier cleanup than if it, hadn't. They removed the reactor vessel from the building and cleaned the whole place up. If this material hadn't been buried deep underground, it posed the risk of infecting nearby people with acute radiation sickness, something that can easily kill a human within days or even years, depending on the amount of exposure. Next up, we have the Chernobyl disaster of 1986, the most damaging and devastating nuclear catastrophe ever. But did you know there was so much destruction and painful deaths that the Soviet government actually tried to hide it from the rest of the world? But before we get into the brutal aftermath of this disaster, let me first explain exactly how it happened. April 25th, 1986, at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, located in the Soviet Union, or what we consider present-day Ukraine. Anyways, the Chernobyl power plant had 4 nuclear reactors that generated electricity for the surrounding areas. And like any other machine in a facility like this, these reactors had to pass routine safety tests. So at around 1 a.m., the power plant operators reduced the power in reactor 4 to perform a scheduled safety test. The point of this was to see if the plant's turbines could produce enough electricity to keep coolant pumps running. That is, before emergency generators turn on in case a power outage occurs. Confusing, I know. Basically, they just needed to ensure the reactors would continue to operate during a power failure. Little did these workers know that in about 24 hours, their safety test would go on to cause insanely painful and agonizing deaths for some unlucky people. Flash forward about 13 hours later at 2 p.m. The plant operators turn off the emergency core cooling system in reactor 4 in preparation for that safety test. Another 11 hours go by, and at around 1 a.m. on April 26, 1986, things start to get real interesting. The power levels in reactor 4 have suddenly plummeted, like way below what's usually considered stable. So what do the operators do to fix this and bring the levels back up? Well, they remove most of the control rods from the reactor's core and turn off the emergency safety features. A big, huge, box-head level dangerous mistake. You would think that they would have called off the test back when they realized something was wrong with the power levels, right? Well, clearly they didn't. The operators were instructed to keep it going. So, just about 20 minutes later at 1:23 a.m., an unexpected power surge suddenly occurs, causing the power levels in Reactor 4 to skyrocket to dangerously high levels. And when this happens, the core of the reactor increases in temperature at an incredibly fast pace. And well, overheated the core, which equals a nuclear meltdown, people. Immediately, an operator takes action and quickly slams his hands down on the emergency shutdown button, hoping to prevent an incoming disaster. This button would drop control rods into the reactor, stopping any nuclear reactions. However, these control rods get jammed as they enter the reactor's core, allowing for the nuclear reactions to actually continue to occur. The operators completely lose control of the coolant and, well, the entire goddamn situation. Temperatures inside the reactor's core soar to extreme levels. The insane heat begins to melt the core, and then just seconds later, Reactor 4 of the Chernobyl power plant explodes. Twice! But oh no, these aren't your typical explosions. These are explosions that will literally affect the world for thousands of years. The whole reactor crumbles in an instant. The 1,000-ton steel lid of the reactor is completely blown off. A literal fireball is then blasted into the sky as 8 tons of radioactive debris is scattered into the atmosphere. Dozens of fire ignite and thick, dark clouds of graphite and radiation are spilling into the air. Not to mention, this blast kills 2 plant workers who happen to be near the reactor, like immediately. So yeah, not really an ideal situation. Just 5 minutes after the explosions, firefighters show up ready to extinguish the fires that were ignited during the blast. But these brave firefighters were completely unaware of what was really happening at the power plant. They had no idea that they were walking into an extremely toxic nuclear disaster with radiation that could kill them everywhere. They showed up in their typical firefighting outfits. Yep, these guys were getting up close and personal with fires at the reactor with zero gear that protected them from the radiation. And over the next few weeks, a couple dozen of these firefighters would die in agony from acute radiation poisoning. Their skin burned and blistered while bacteria literally ate them from the inside out. Their burning red skin peeled off their bodies at the slightest touch. Yeah, ouch. One even died because of cardiac arrest. And guys, what about the citizens of the towns that were near the explosion? Well, the closest civilization to the power plant was the town of Pripyat, just less than 2 miles away. And remember how I said that the Soviet government wanted to keep this whole nuclear disaster thing a secret? They were so paranoid of the information about the catastrophe leaking that they refused to tell anyone anything, including the surrounding areas and towns that were in danger of radiation poisoning. Pripyat was the prime example. These poor people weren't informed of the atomic disaster until 36 hours after the goddamn meltdown. Yup. A whole day and a half later, the radiation levels from the blast were astronomically high in the town of Pripyat. Like, way too high for anyone to continue living there. Each second that they spent in that town, the higher the radiation levels were, reaching 180 to 300 milliroentgens, which is a way of measuring radiation. And as we know, radiation exposure and the human body don't mix well, especially long term. Nearly 20,000 cases of thyroid cancer were developed years after in people who just lived in Ukraine or Belarus. The Soviet government literally kept these people in danger just to try and save their own ass. Eventually, Soviet officers came to their senses and realized that they have to evacuate the damn place. About 38 hours after the disaster, evacuation began in the area that was within 30 kilometers of the power plant. A whopping 115,000 people were evacuated from these areas. Almost 50,000 of these people from the town of Pripyat alone. Over the town's loudspeakers, residents were told to only bring important documents and personal necessities because it would only be a temporary evacuation. Yeah, sure, whatever you say. Because flash forward to present day, Pripyat is still completely abandoned. No, seriously, Boxheads, the radiation levels are still so high that the area won't be habitable to humans for another 20,000 years. Temporary evacuation, yeah, my box butt. Anyway, if the Soviets were so top secret about this accident, how in the hell did the rest of the world figure out what happened? How is Boxhead making this video right now? Well, it's actually pretty crazy how people found out the radiation from the explosions was so spread across Europe that it actually reached multiple different countries, specifically in northern Sweden. The Swedes eventually figured out that it wasn't an issue on their end. They investigated and discovered that the only plausible reason for the high radiation was because of their neighbors to the east, the Soviets. So, the Soviet government finally fessed up about their nuclear accident, but without really telling the whole truth. They tried to downplay the whole situation, claiming that there was just a damage to a reactor at the Chernobyl power plant, and that it was all under control. Well, the Soviets had no choice but to draft hundreds of thousands of civilians and military personnel into a risky cleanup crew. And guys, the number of workers was recorded to reach up to 800,000. These guys were called the liquidators. They basically went in and bulldozed infected villages and structures, removed contaminated materials, and cleaned up the foods left in abandoned towns to, prevent the outbreaks of diseases. Anything that required working in or near the Chernobyl power plant categorized you as one of these workers. Only 4,000 out of the estimated 800,000 workers ever died from direct causes of their liquidating work. Radiation exposure, cancer, the big ones. Next up, we have the Fukushima Daiichi disaster of 2011. This next catastrophic nuclear disaster was actually triggered by a record-breaking earthquake. March 11th, 2011 is a day that starts off like any other in the country of Japan. People are at work, kids are at school, everything's fine. But what no one realizes is that this same day would be the start of the country's most tragic disaster ever. At 2:46 p.m., a deep rumble can be felt beneath the earth. The ground starts shaking violently. Buildings are swaying and trembling. As everyone knows by now, an earthquake is hitting their country. People around the country are suddenly bracing for impact through a completely unexpected and incredibly strong earthquake. The ground intensely shakes for 6 consecutive minutes, as civilians are taking cover and attempting to keep themselves out of harm's way. Once those 6 minutes finally pass, the people of Japan are unaware that they just lived through one of the most powerful ever recorded earthquakes in their country's history. And for my nerds out there, it was actually the 4th strongest in the whole world. A 9.1 magnitude earthquake. In case you don't know, that is insanely strong. So, not even an hour later, this super powerful earthquake triggers another natural disaster. This time, it's a tsunami. A massive, huge big tsunami. This tsunami sent waves that reached up to 50 goddamn feet directly onto the island of Japan. Imagine that. People are just starting to clean up the aftermath of one horrible disaster, just to look up and see a near 50-foot wave barreling straight towards them. These powerful waves swept up everything in their path and caused incredible amounts of destruction. The wave traveled 6 miles inland, completely obliterating buildings and entire towns in its way. And the aftermath of the earthquake and tsunami was not pretty at all. Well, over 100,000 buildings were destroyed, debris filled the land that people once considered a home, and many innocent people, mainly the elderly, died tragic deaths. Over 19,000 people lost their lives as a result of these horrible tragedies. But hold on, let's flash back in time just a little bit. Once the earthquake hits the country, the operators at the Fukushima power plant are worried. Well, duh, of course, but not like how you would expect them to be. So the power plant initiates its routine procedure of what to do when an earthquake occurs. It shuts down the main reactor so the plant isn't operational during the earthquake. As you can probably imagine, it would be incredibly risky to run a nuclear plant while a whole freaking island is shaking uncontrollably. So from the shutdown, the plant loses power as expected, and the emergency generators at the very bottom of the plant turn on. These generators are now tasked with providing enough power to continue moving around water in the plant. This water has a very important job to cool the nuclear reactors. And if the reactors don't get cooled, well, they'll overheat to insanely hot temperatures and leave us with what we call a nuclear meltdown. Anyways, the emergency generators are on and everything is running perfectly fine. The safety procedures at the plant are a success and are able to withstand the earthquake. Everyone in the plant probably feels a huge sense of relief. They can finally take a breath and calm down after experiencing a pretty scary earthquake. They're glad to be breathing and are ready to move on with the rest of their day. But those sighs of relief are about to turn into terrified screams real damn quick. Because as the workers look out the window of the power plant, their smiles drop. A massive ocean wave can be seen in the distance. And like I mentioned earlier, it was a near 50 foot above sea level wave. And that monster was headed straight towards the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Damn, that was a mouthful. You can only imagine just how horrified these workers were, because to make things worse, they knew that there was no way of protecting the plant from the tsunami. They had no more safety regulations to attempt or any time to prepare. And as it approaches, it's clear that this wave absolutely towers over the seawalls that are supposed to protect the power plant from the ocean. Like seriously, it almost doubles them in height. The workers and probably everyone else in the area watches as the giant wave easily powers and slams into the seawall. There is nothing that anyone can do to prevent this massive wave from causing destruction. The wave then wastes no time sending an enormous amount of water rushing straight towards the power plant. The water reaches the plant not long after. With a crazy amount of force, the tsunami crushes into the plant. Whoosh! The water instantly surrounds the site, drowning the whole place in a massive flood. People are horrified inside as they have no idea what to do. Hell, there's nothing they can do. And remember how the emergency generators were at the very bottom of the plant? When the water first slams into the plant and pours into the basement, the generators flood and fail immediately. The workers inside are suddenly met with a power outage. Every room in the plant turns off from lots of light and tech stuff to completely pitch black. Imagine the fear from the operators, sitting in a dark room, their buildings are surrounded by water, knowing a nuclear disaster is bound to happen and they're cooped up in the middle. And the worst part is that no power for the generators means no water being moved around for the plant to be cooling. Knowing the potential dangers of an incoming nuclear emergency, the Japanese government orders all workers in the power plant to evacuate immediately. People's concern with the power plant is growing by the second. After being struck by two awful natural disasters earlier in the day, no one has any idea how much destruction this incoming nuclear disaster could cause. But they're definitely preparing for the worst, which is good. The government decided that all civilians within a 2-kilometer radius of the plant must evacuate, or else they would be in immediate radiation danger. And later it became a 10-kilometer radius, and then it became a 20-kilometer radius. Approximately 154,000 people are forced to evacuate their homes near the plant. People quickly pack up whatever they can bring with them and leave their whole lives behind. Terrified and clueless, they have no choice but to listen to the government's orders. On the national broadcasts and radio stations, Japanese government officials announced to the country that a nuclear emergency has been declared. Anyways, inside the reactors over the next few days, temperatures are rising to extreme levels of heat without any cooling. In Reactor 1 specifically, temperatures reach 5,070 degrees Fahrenheit. And hold on, Boxhead, let me put that into some perspective for you. That's half the temperature of the damn sun. Yeah, I just said that. The damn sun. Steam pressure is produced in the reactors, forcing the water levels to drastically drop and creating hydrogen inside. While all of this is going on, nuclear waste is being released into the atmosphere from the melting down reactors. Chemical reactions are forming inside the reactors, and it's nothing but bad news. Because one day later, on March 12th at 3:56 p.m., a massive hydrogen explosion suddenly ignites, blowing the roof off of reactor number 1. A massive hydrogen explosion suddenly ignites, blowing the roof off of reactor number 1. Huge clouds of gray smoke rapidly grow from the explosion and fill the atmosphere. The hydrogen that was created inside had combined with the oxygen outside of the reactor, causing almost like a hydrogen bomb explosion. Oh, don't believe me? I mean, take a look your damn self. At this point, everyone is hoping that this nightmare of a week is finally over. But still, somehow these people were wrong. Because flash forward another 2 days on March 14th at 11:01 a.m., now reactor number 3 has exploded as well. The roof and the top part of the reactor are blown off as another hydrogen explosion takes place. The reactor is destroyed and more radiation is blown into the environment. What about the other reactors at the plant? Well, on March 15th at 6:15 a.m., reactor number 2 suffers what would have been an explosion just like the previous two. However, scared of the fact that another harmful explosion would occur and throw more radiation into the air, the staff at the plant quickly decided to open a panel in the reactor. Basically, it vented out the hydrogen before another explosion could occur. But this came at a price. Their ventilation actually allowed for more and more dangerous radiation to be let out into the environment. Because of the power plant disaster, radiation levels around Japan were rapidly increasing. But thank God they never reached a level high enough to provoke life-threatening health issues. But still, people had no choice but to leave behind their belongings and their homes. Anything they ever knew. Most of them ended up in shelters, and unfortunately some died from the non-nuclear disaster causes. Now, out of this whole video, this is the part that really gets me. Approximately 2,000 people died as a result from the stress of their incredibly tough lives. Yeah, nothing but stress killed these people.
We're diving into caves where the people who went into them died horribly. This first one is actually not that known, and it's the Ellison's Cave tragedy. Only a few hours from the cave is the University of Florida in Gainesville. And 10 students went up to the cave on February 12th, 2011. Because hey, who needs a beer and partying in a college town in Gainesville when you could just go sit in a rock tube? I seriously don't get people. The group consisted of 5 boys and 5 girls. 2 of which were Grant Lockenbach, who was 20, and Michael Peary, who was 18 years old, who would never come out of the cave again. Another fun fact you should probably know about this cave, it's considered the deepest cave in the US. With the pit so deep, they call it the Fantastic Pit, and it's almost 600 feet deep. Kinda like your girlfriend after she hangs out with the guy she told you not to worry about. Sorry, boxheads, someone had to tell you. Anyways, the group parks the car at the base of the mountain, and by the way, Ellison's Cave is located in Georgia, USA, and it is over 12 miles long. You could absolutely never convince me to get into one of these things after I researched this goddamn story. They're probably thinking to themselves, let's set our iPhone 4s down and really live in the moment. Hashtag live, laugh, love. Hashtag who needs emergency equipment. Hashtag subscribe to Boxhead. They didn't say that. And went up to the mountain towards the cave with what my mother would say is nothing on. It's February in the Appalachian Mountains. It's pretty damn cold. The group of 10 got to the cave entrance and looked at each other with suspense and thought what every college kid thinks when they're about to enter a really deep hole. Man, I should have brought some protection. But they went in without it anyways. The cave, I mean. The 10 college kids made their way deeper into the cave with every step sipping their little water. And someone totally said, guys, isn't it kind of nice we don't have our phones? Bro, I know, I feel like so zen right now. Bro, you dropped the bag. Bro, the girls are watching. I'll get it. Dude, that's a giant pit, what are you even doing? It's for the Vine, bruh. I can already see the comments. Actually, this was 2011 and Vine was only released in 2013. Yeah, so the bag fell into a pit called the warm-up pit, which was around 125 feet deep. There was a large, freezing waterfall that would soon make things very difficult. After the bag had fallen, the group wanted to turn back, probably thinking, let's go get some beers, this is stupid. But our guy Grant insisted on going down to get it so that they could, continue. But as he descended deeper and deeper, he started to shiver as he got closer to the giant waterfall. The water is freezing. Okay, fine. Not literally, but the water in that cave only ranges between 32 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty cold. As his body inched down the rope, he found himself getting closer and closer to the waterfall, slowly moving down. He tried to avoid the cold water by swinging away, but that caused him to get tangled in his own ropes, and he just hung there, slowly moving down into the water. As the freezing water rushed over him, Grant screamed for help, and Michael, a hero friend, got his harness on, and down he went after him. The harness zipped Michael down, and as he got closer, he tried to help Grant get free of the water. Yank, pull, and right there, ladies and boxheads, is where everything got even worse. The rope twisted around Michael too. See, remember, they're on the same rope. The roaring water dragged at the rope, pulling it tighter and made both of them even more tangled. And shortly after Michael got down there, it dragged him too under the water. And guys, by this point, Grant was barely conscious. Alright, so once Michael started freaking out, a few friends above decided, let's call for some help, and rushed down the mountain to where they parked their cars.
911, what's your emergency?
My friends are stuck in the goddamn cave. Please send help. The authorities were called at 2:19 p.m. and they rushed over to the scene to hopefully help Grant and Michael. Move. The rescuers climbed down the cave walls and made their way to the scene where both Grant and Michael were tangled. They attached pulleys and went down to rescue them, praying it wasn't too late. But at 3:30, when the rescue team recovered their cold, stiff, pulseless bodies, they had already known that they had both died from hypothermia. The cave had echoes of the crying friends mourning the loss of the two boys. Shortly after the tragic loss, the University of Florida held a candlelight vigil for the loss of the students. By the way, they were both academic scholars and well loved among their friends. The families mourned the loss of their boys, and the others in the cave would hold that memory forever. Now, this next guy was the same age as the last two, and he too would be stuck in a cave, but this time his body would never leave. This is the tragedy of Neil Moss. Neil Moss was an undergraduate student at Balliol, Oxford, which means he was a pretty smarty pants, really thinking outside the box, huh? Which means, of course, we love him. It's March 22nd, 1959, and 8 people make their way into Peak Caverns in Derbyshire. God, the British really know how to make things sound like a full of goddamn crumpets, don't they? Anyways, there was this newly discovered vertical shaft that no one had been down before. And that shaft looked pretty goddamn big. That's what she said. God, I'm like 5 years old. The group of 8 people were cavers from the... Let me check my notes here. The British Speleological Association. Sure, bro. You're climbing into caves, yet you name it as if you guys are gonna fill out that shit on some royal tax form. Like, hello? So yeah, they found this new shaft, and it was guessed that the depth of the shaft would be around like 40 feet, but they lowered to around 75 feet just to be sure. Moss kicked the ladder down the hole. The ladder dropped down and disappeared into the depths below. Oh, Wetty boys, time to make some history, he probably said as he dropped in. One step at a time, Moss lowered himself into the vertical passage. There was a boulder that seemed to be blocking the way, and he tried to kick it out of the way, but then the worst possible thing happened. His body became trapped in a space just 18 inches wide. I'm stuck, he probably yelled. The group quickly tried to help him. They lowered ropes down. He would wrap them around himself and they would pull. They tried this over and over again, and each time the ropes would either tear or he wouldn't even move at all. And not to mention, well, I mean, this is the case for a lot of these stories we cover, but air quickly became a problem. See, this was a shaft that was about 40 feet vertical, and Neil's body made a better door than a window in regards to airflow. So the air down there was getting thin, or worse, polluted, with dust and other shit that goes down a shaft. As Neil was breathing in this air, he started becoming delirious and not at all aware of the danger he was in. Hey, you guys go out to eat. I'm fine here, he called. Like, imagine being 40 feet down in a rock tube and telling your only hope of rescue, go, have some brewskis while you're just sitting there dying. Like, guys, this is clearly carbon monoxide poisoning. Oh, you don't know what that is, huh? Well, clearly you didn't watch my other videos because, fine, I'll forgive you. It's basically when your brain isn't getting enough oxygen and you start acting like a goddamn fool. So yes, Neil has seen better days. Let's just call rescue. Breathe and get your tea out your ass. It's 1959 and the iPhone hasn't even been invented yet. We can't use the goddamn telly. Oh, Roy. So someone had to find the old telly and get someone to get this sorry son of a gun out of a goddamn rock hole. Wee woo, wee woo, wee woo. The ambulances and a bunch of volunteers rushed over to get this man out of the hole. They have tanks of oxygen, ropes, and a load of presumably some tea. But anyone who was lowering themselves into this cave quickly came back up because of the foul air. Okay, so it's now early in the morning on day 2, and the bad air drove back up more and more attempts to get him out. And the bad air was getting seriously bad. I mean, there were so many attempts to try and get him, but they seriously just kept coming back up. They tried over and over again to try to get this oxygen into the hole, but it never seemed to be enough. Of those who tried, there was a very brave girl at 18 years old. Her name was June Bailey, who was small enough to get to him, but quickly realized that she was becoming hypoxic by, going lower. So by now, he's been in this goddamn hole stuck for over 24 hours. But everyone that was trying to help felt like they couldn't give up. His father was weeping at the cave entrance, never did enter the cave, but seriously, he couldn't bear to see his son in that state. His breathing could still be heard. They knew he was still down there alive, but then the rain came down harder and harder. All personnel for your safety until the rain stops to stand down. That was the final order. The rain might have flooded the cavern and caused even more problems. The group retreated, and they waited. When the rain finally stopped, the group made their way back to the cave and just listened. Just nothing. Pure silence. At that very instance, the doctors determined a time of death of around 3 a.m. on Tuesday, March 24th. The doctors said that it was their first time giving a time of death without actually seeing the patient. Eric Moss, his father, broke down in tears, and he actually requested that they stop the rescue so that no more lives were lost in this cave. They decided later to seal the shaft, trapping his body there forever. And hold on, they renamed it from the stalagmite chamber in Peak Caverns to the Moss chamber in his honor. And guys, look, I saved the most painful cave death for last. Everyone meet Floyd Collins, who was born in 1887. Floyd wasn't just content with f***ing around underground for fun. No, he had bigger plans. Okay, caving was kind of like the NFT of Kentucky back then. Basically, he wanted to find a cave so impressive, so spectacular that people would actually pay to walk through it. Yeah, this was a time when charging people to see holes in the ground was a viable business plan. Floyd's great idea was Sand Cave, a part of the Mammoth Cave system in Kentucky, which, by the way, was one of the largest cave systems in the whole goddamn world. Mammoth Cave was already a big deal, tourists loved it, but Floyd, being the ambitious little guy that he was, thought that Sand Cave would be his big breakthrough. No, dude, seriously, this guy died trying to be a 1920s YouTuber. This shit is absolutely wild. So it's January 30th, 1925, and Floyd decides, let me head to the Sand Cave on a solo mission. Just him, a lantern, and his wild dreams of fame and fortune. Buddy, you're not Boxhead, little man. Anyways, he squeezes through a few tight passages, inch by inch, because apparently that was a definition of a good time back then. Now, when I say tight, nope. Nope. I am not going to say it. I'm putting my foot down. The jokes in this video have gone too goddamn far. We're talking spaces where you can't even turn your head without scraping it on the goddamn walls. If you're even slightly claustrophobic, this would be your worst nightmare, and I recommend you click off the video right now. Now, I can't click off the video because obviously it's my video, but miss me with that bullshit. But not for Floyd. Nah, this guy's a committed man. He's making his way deeper and deeper into this cave. He finally finds what looks like a promising spot, and of course Floyd, being the adventurer he was, figures, what's the worst that can happen, guys? And starts lowering himself. One step at a time, Floyd shimmies his way down this 55-foot deep vertical shaft. And probably thinking to himself while he's going down, this is it, I'm about to be rich. Just when Floyd's about halfway down, out of nowhere, a 26-pound rock comes loose from the ceiling. Now, it doesn't sound like that big of a deal, right? 26-pound rock, boy, I'm bench pressing that. You feel me? Anyways, this rock decides it's going to sit itself right on top of Floyd's left leg, pinning him against the narrow cave wall. Floyd's not just stuck, this man is super duper stuck. And before you think, you stupid boxhead, he could have just pushed the rock off. Let me stop you right there, mister. Remember, this passage is so tight that Floyd could barely move his arms, let alone reposition himself. So he wasn't just trapped, he was goddamn. Woo, profanity boy. YouTube, I'm sorry. But he's already deep underground and his family knew that he'd gone caving, but it wasn't until hours later that his brother, Homer Collins, realized that something might have been off. Homer goes to go check on Floyd and finds that Floyd is in the worst possible position. Floyd was wedged in there like a goddamn human cork in a wine bottle. They tried ropes, pulleys, brute strength, but each time the ropes would break or Floyd wouldn't even budge an inch. Like, guys, imagine the frustration of trying to pull a grown man out of a narrow hole in the ground using nothing but ropes. It's like trying to pull a couch up a goddamn spiral staircase, buddy. It's not happening. So, our guy Homer calls for help. And of course, word gets out, and in 1925, when word gets out, it really got out. Like, Floyd was the Haktua girl of his time. And before you knew it, every journalist and their grandmother is flocking to Butt, Kentucky to cover this tragedy. By February 1st, Floyd being stuck in the hole was national news. Reporters were showing up with cameras, notepads, and a disturbing level of enthusiasm for a man trapped underground who might die. Eventually, thousands of hats were gathered around the cave to watch what exactly, I don't know. The dude stuck in a goddamn hole, like, what are they looking at? Guys, I'm being so serious about this. Vendors would set up food stands, locals sold souvenirs, and tourists treated the whole thing like some goddamn twisted carnival. Meanwhile, Floyd, yeah, he was still stuck in the hole. By now, professional rescue teams had arrived, armed with all kinds of gear. Motorized winches, oxygen tanks, and enough rope to make a Boy Scout goddamn proud. Problem was, the cave wasn't cooperating. I mean, it's a rock hole, I don't know what they wanted from it. Every time they tried to pull Floyd out, more dirt and more rocks would just collapse onto him, making the situation even worse and more painful. The passage was just too tight, too unstable. Meanwhile, Floyd's condition was getting worse and worse. He was cold, exhausted, and started losing hope. They tried sending Floyd food and water through tubes, along with, of all things, whiskey. Yeah, guys, I mean, because you're trapped underground with no way out, I mean, you might as well have a goddamn drink, right? Despite their best efforts, though, nothing seemed to work. And Floyd was hanging on by a goddamn thread. The lack of oxygen was starting to become a problem, as it, tends to be for humans. He was becoming delirious, and at one point, he supposedly called up to the rescuers saying that he was ready to go to heaven. Yikes. As Floyd's condition deteriorated, the rescuers decided to change their tactics. Instead of trying to pull him straight out, they came up with this new idea. Dig a tunnel into the side of the cave and reach him that way. Yeah, it sounded brilliant on paper, but in reality, not so much. The cave was way too unstable, and every time they dug, more debris would fall, and days turned into weeks, and it became more and more clear that they were racing against time. But they kept digging. They dug through the rock, the mud, and anything else in their way, hoping that somehow they could reach Floyd before it was too late. Fast forward to February 16th, and it has nearly been 14 days since Floyd first got stuck. The rescue team had finally broken through their tunnel, but guys, it was too late. Floyd had died from exposure, starvation, and hypoxia. Or in simpler terms, he was stuck in a fucking hole for 2 weeks. He was found in the same exact spot he'd been since day one, trapped beneath that 26-pound rock deep underground. When the rescue team finally reached him, there was nothing left to do but declare him dead. Now guys, the official time of death was estimated to be around 3 a.m. on February 13th, but no one really knows for sure. And here's where things take a even wilder turn. Oh, did you think we were done? After Floyd's death, the rescuers had to make a tough call. They decided to leave his body in the cave because they couldn't risk any more lives trying to pull him out. So they sealed up the passage, leaving him in the place that he had hoped would bring him so much fame and fortune. Oh, wait. Did you think everyone listened to the rules? No. Months later, a team including Floyd's brother Homer finally managed to retrieve Floyd's body.
They were able to bury him, and you would think that all is well. Well, of course, until they found out that the property was actually sold to a dentist named Dr. Harry Thomas, who, hold on, dug up the body and put the body back into the cave on display in a goddamn glass coffin. Woo! Did you think we were done? His body was then stolen. Yes, stolen from the coffin and then yeeted into some bushes. His body was found with his left leg missing. And then his body was put into another coffin back inside the cave. Until his family pleaded and pleaded with the National Park Service to, you know, not have this man's body be a goddamn tourist attraction. Fine, they said, and you'll be happy to know that Floyd is no longer in the cave. Let's talk about a plane hijacking incident where everyone on board tragically burned to death, all because the hijacker wasn't happy about being fired from his job. Yeah, I'm not even kidding about this one. December 7th, 1987, a plane carrying 43 people crashed into a hillside, killing everyone on board. What happened was nothing short of horrifying. Let's rewind a bit. The hijacker was a man named David Burke, who was an employee of US Air, which was a larger company owning some smaller Pacific Southwest airlines. He was born in Croydon, England, but immigrated to the United States later on in his life. When he got older, he worked for the US Air in New York, but was actually suspected of being involved in a street pharmacy ring smuggling, let's call it the Devil's Snow. He was doing this between Jamaica and New York and using the airline to do it. Yeah, some would say that wouldn't fly today. But boxheads, get this, Burke was never officially charged. He knew the authorities were onto him, so before anything officially happened, Burke moved to Los Angeles so the authorities would just, you know, leave him alone. In case you didn't pick up on this already, our guy Burke was a bad cat. So I searched on the internet and he was described as being a violent man by previous girlfriends, neighbors, and law enforcement. He'd been arrested for domestic violence, but again, the worst thing that really ever happened to the guy was a night in jail. Gotta love the justice system, man. And to top it off, he had 7 kids with 4 different women. This guy couldn't pull out of a goddamn driveway. Alright, enough about pulling out, let's fast forward to right before the flight, where everything went down. Burke was actually fired. For what, you may ask? He stole $70 goddamn dollars from the flight liquor revenue. And he was also suspected of operating another street pharmacy. I'm guessing by now you know what I mean by street pharmacy. There were not many details on it, so as far as the law is concerned, nothing happened. So let's get this straight. This guy almost got caught smuggling the first time. Literally fled to Los Angeles just to risk it all again? What are you chasing, my man? A sugar high? What's going on? And as you would expect, he got fired for stealing the $70, like I mentioned before. Even though he was clearly in the wrong, he felt that somehow he was screwed over by the company. Some people, am I right? So a very pissed off Burke decided he was gonna hurt the company that hurt him. And this man's grand plan was to go and borrow a .44 Magnum revolver from his damn coworker. Why this man has a revolver is beyond me, and honestly, I kind of wonder how that went. Hey bro, can I borrow your gun? For what? Reasons. This of course is going to end super well, as you could probably read from the title. Oh, I also forgot to mention that even after he was fired, he didn't give back any of his credentials. Which credentials, you might ask? The employee security bypass that he used at the checkpoint to give him access to inside the Los Angeles International Airport. And more importantly, the damn planes. Of course, this was before 9/11, so airplanes kind of operated more like bus stations back then. So nobody was questioning this guy at all. Okay. After boarding the plane, Burke wrote a message on an air sickness bag. It read, hold on, let me get the exact quote. Hi Ray, I think it's sort of ironical that we ended up like this. I asked for some leniency for my family, remember? Well, I got none and you'll get none. This guy didn't write so good, huh? Not much of a languager, they would say. It wasn't long before the plane took off. The engines rumbled and the plane was in the air, with Burke stowed away somewhere, you know, like in the back of the plane. Once it was cruising at an altitude of 22,000 feet, Burke made his way to the cockpit. The plane's voice recorder recorded the cockpit door while it was being opened. And you know, when the hijacker was entering. Hey, you can't be in here. Burke smirked and he pulled out a gun and pointed it right to the pilot's head. Pulled the note from his pocket that, you know, he wrote earlier and handed it right to him. What is this? What? Please, no. Burke then turned the gun to the co-pilot. Wait, I have a... Now again, the plane was flying at 22,000 feet over the California coast when Burke shot the damn pilots. The only one in the damn cockpit flying this plane in the air is this nutcase. Yeah, crazy, am I right?
What's going on?
Said a flight attendant who heard the shots going on in the cockpit. Burke shot her too. Blood spattered on the wall behind her and it was just a complete mess. Burke was laughing and then he took control of the damn plane. He pushed the throttle all the way down and the plane entered a dive. Vroom. The plane was falling out of the sky and headed straight for a hillside below. 21,000 feet. Screaming and yelling is heard in the back of the plane. 18,000 feet. The passengers are horrified. 15,000 feet. Pull up, pull up. Pull up. The alarms are going nuts. Altitude warning. 5,000 feet. As the plane was at a dangerously low and falling altitude, an off-duty pilot entered the cockpit to get control of the plane, but it was too late. Kaboom! At 4:16 p.m., after Burke had shot both of the pilots and hijacked the plane, it crashed straight into the rocky hillside at the speed of sound. The plane disintegrated instantly, killing every single person on board. And get this, the crash was so violent, only 11 passengers were ever even identified. During the investigation, the authorities found out that Burke had left a goodbye message to his girlfriend. And get this, his coworker actually admitted to lending him the gun. Could you imagine that you were responsible for 43 people dying just because you decided to give a psycho your gun? Oh, good lord. This hijacking though in specific actually changed some laws. It is now mandatory for airlines to take credentials the second they fire someone. So you know, they can't just walk through the security. And on board were multiple executives from Chevron, which led to many corporations making policies that high-ranking officials can't be on the same flight as, you know, each other, because all these guys died. Okay, this next one is absolutely horrifying. So get this, North Korea sent 2 agents out into the world to blow up an airplane. The plane was Korean Flight 858. It was an international flight between Baghdad, Iraq and Seoul, South Korea. Now the flight had over 100 people on board. Wait, before we get into that, since you guys enjoyed my $10 giveaway so much in the last video, let's go ahead and do it again. The least liked comment on this video will get $10. Obviously, you must be subscribed and you also have to be in the Discord, link in bio, so I can contact you if you win. So why in the world would anyone want to blow up the whole plane? Well, for those that don't know, the North Koreans and the South Koreans don't like each other much. And as the world waited for the 1988 Olympic Games in Seoul, the North Koreans decided that blowing up a passenger plane headed to Seoul would get athletes from around the world to not want to go anymore. Yeah, this whole thing sounds crazy, so let's rewind a little bit, boxheads. It all starts with 2 North Korean agents, Kim Hyun-hui and Kim Song-gil, who were trained by the North Korean government. Their mission was to place a bomb on Korean Air Flight 858 and detonate it, with the goal of killing everyone on board. Yeah, over 100 people. Messed up, right? Kim Hyun-hui and Kim Song-gil traveled under Japanese aliases, using fake Japanese passports, which is how they got on the plane without any suspicion. Oh, so they think all Asians look alike, huh? Before you attack me in the comments, do not say anything until you see my face reveal. Anyways, the North Korean spies boarded the flight in Baghdad, where they carried with them the device that would end the lives of everyone on board. A bomb that did this. Seriously, pre-9/11 air travel security was just a joke. The bomb was disguised as a Panasonic transistor radio and a bottle of liquor. By the way, the liquid explosive was what, was in the bottle. And the machine to set it off was the radio. The bomb's timer was set to detonate the device mid-flight. Korean Air Flight 858 left Baghdad and made a scheduled stopover to Abu Dhabi. During the stop, the 2 North Korean agents got off the aircraft, but not before leaving behind the bomb in an overhead compartment in the airplane. I bet they were real nervous about a delay when landing. The agents then traveled separately to different destinations, trying to cover their tracks. After the layover in Abu Dhabi, Flight 858 continued its journey to Seoul, with the bomb still on board in the plane. No one on board knew what was about to happen. The aircraft took off from Abu Dhabi at approximately 11:30 a.m. local time, with 104 passengers and 11 crew members on board. The passengers included the South Korean workers returning home, businessmen, and foreign nationals, all with families to get back home to. At around 2:05 p.m. local time, as the aircraft was cruising at an altitude of 37,000 feet over the Andaman Sea, suddenly the bomb detonated. The explosion went on from the overhead compartment, causing the instant decompression of the aircraft. As everyone was panicking, the second bomb went off. There was an explosion in the overhead that blasted a hole in the side of the damn airplane. Everyone near the bomb was vaporized almost instantly. But those passengers were the ones who got it easy. The rest of the plane, not so lucky. The plane ripped apart instantly. Pieces of the plane with the passengers still in the seats hurtled toward the ocean from 37,000 feet in the air. This was the roller coaster from goddamn hell. The sudden explosion and disintegration of the plane meant that there was no time for the crew to send a distress signal, which means their fate was sealed. All of the passengers and flight crew were killed instantly. That's just horrifying. The wreckage of the aircraft was scattered all over a wide area in the Andaman Sea, making recovery efforts very, very hard. The disappearance of Korean Air Flight 858 confused and scared everyone, especially the families. When the aircraft did not arrive in Seoul, search and rescue teams went out looking for it. However, the Andaman Sea is huge, and no one even knew what happened. So finding the wreckage was nearly impossible. Some would say a needle in a haystack. Rescue teams searched the sea and authorities began to put together a story about what happened to the flight. They knew it has been attacked, but by who? The investigation began. They checked through thousands and thousands of flight logs to find the one that looked kinda off. It wasn't long before the authorities saw that the travel patterns of the two North Korean agents were very strange, and how they got off before the connecting flight to Seoul. Okay, I'm gonna call this one Kim H because I feel like I'm butchering the name, so I'm gonna make it easy on myself. So Kim H and Kim Song-il were detained while trying to board a flight to Rome using fake passports. But obviously, I think the two agents saw this coming, so they had a plan for if they were ever caught. They were trained to never give up a damn word. Get this whole thing is about to get crazy. The two were brought into detainment rooms for an obvious interrogation. "Who sent you?" yelled the interrogator. Casually, Kim Song-il opened a pack of cigarettes and put one in his mouth. He smirked and lit that boy up, you know what I'm saying? Then he decided to crunch it, and as soon as he bit down, his head slumped and smacked his face right into the table. This man died instantly. The police, and now you guys, I guess, were completely stunned. Heck, I mean, I was even stunned. It turns out he was trained to bite into a cyanide-laced cigarette, if he was ever caught. That's some crazy spy work, am I right? Well, said the police. It's gonna be kind of hard to question him now. By the way, I'm making all this up. I just want to make the dialogue sound cool. Well, we have the other one. Go, go, go. Stop her now. The police rushed into Kim H's detainment room just in time because this homegirl was asking for her cigarettes back. But no. Your pal already tried that one. Kim H was extradited to South Korea, which means the Berhan authorities sent her back to face trial in South Korea, where the people weren't thrilled that she did that, to say the least. Well, as soon as she got there, she confessed to the bombing. She basically told them everything, including detailed information about the plot, the construction of the bomb, the involvement of the North Korean government, and the training she and Kim Song-il had received. Bro, she really went from "I'd rather die than talk" to "okay, here's everything," real damn quick. The bombing had an insane political fallout, as you could probably imagine. Next, we have a story where one woman risked her life to save the passengers on board, but ended up getting brutally, unalived. Let's just get right into it. Pan Am Flight 73 was scheduled to go from Mumbai, India to New York City on September 5th, 1986. There were 379 passengers and crew members on board, and all of them were about to be a part of one of the worst hostage situations in history. It all starts with 4 armed men from a group of terrorists called the Abu Nidal Organization. For anyone that doesn't know, and you probably don't know, they were Palestinian military men that were super highly trained to, unalive people. Anyways, these men all drove through a security checkpoint in, get this, a fake police van. Man, talk Talk about the irony, am I right? Anyways, like I said before, pre-9/11 airport security was not known for being the best. And once they got past the checkpoint, their mission was pretty clear. Hijack the plane and force it to fly to Cyprus, where they plan to exchange the hostages on board for their imprisoned comrades. I don't know what they really saw these people as, like Pokemon cards? Like, you can't just go there and trade people, bro. This is not how this works. Anyways, they were armed with assault rifles, pistols, grenades, and plastic explosive belts. They boarded the plane in Karachi, Pakistan, disguised as, get this, airport security personnel. The hijackers struck with military precision, broke down the door to the cockpit, guns blazing. They took control of the entire aircraft. The flight attendants, realizing the situation, tried to start evacuating the passengers, forcing them to the rear end of the plane, trying to save as many people as they could, and also trying to keep everyone calm. Imagine trying to stay calm during a hijacking like this. Yeah, right, I would be screaming my lungs out, shawty. You ain't keeping me in control. Anyways, let me introduce you to one woman that was specifically noted in this hijacking that we're gonna talk about, throughout this whole story. Her name was Nerija Banat, who is actually a flight attendant who was a total badass hero. I mean, right as the attack began, she alerted the cockpit crew who managed to escape through a hatch, effectively grounding the plane. I mean, think about it real quick. No pilots? That means no takeoff. Smart move. Okay, well now the plane is stuck on the ground, let's get into what was happening inside. The leader of all the hijackers, his name was Safrini, and obviously he wasn't too happy about the plane being grounded, so he kinda got a little mad. He made his demands known, and if you forgot that already, his demand was to fly the plane to Karachi. But things were taking way too long. So, Safrini searched the plane for a perfect person to use as a threat. Yeah, and he went and grabbed 29-year-old Rajesh Kumar. Safrini grabbed the man and told him to get to the front of the plane, and then used him to threaten the authorities. "Kneel!" he shouted at Kumar, and Kumar got on his knees in front of the aircraft. "If we don't have a pilot in the next 30 minutes, I will shoot him in the head." Or said something along those lines. Shortly after, Safrini got impatient and grabbed Kumar. Safrini shot Kumar in the head in front of everyone. Yeah, kinda messed up. Well, Plan B. Safrini then ordered the flight attendants to start collecting passports. He wanted all of the Americans on board to be identified. This guy must really not like Americans. I don't really know what that means for me. Nirja's bravery didn't stop at just alerting the pilots. Next up, she started hiding the passports of the American passengers to prevent the hijackers from, identifying them. Since Kumar didn't get to live long once he was dragged out of the plane. For the next 16 hours, the passengers just sat in fear. They were hostages. Every now and then, they would get called to speak with the leader. One of these guys was a British man named Michael Thexton, who at the time lost his brother. Now, he has to go talk to this psycho hijacker leader guy. Mike looked at Safrini, terrified obviously, and begged him not to kill him because he said that he didn't want his mom to be childless. And guys, it actually worked. Seems like a man with a heart if you kind of forget the part where he blew a man's brains out and he's hijacking a damn airplane. I'm just kidding. Don't go to the comments. I'm kidding. He's not a nice guy. He's a bad man. Don't storm the comments. Okay, now let's talk about what was happening outside of the airplane. Negotiators were outside of the plane and were probably like, hold on, sir, we're working on it. Trying to obviously stall for more time to save everyone. I mean, just imagine that. Every minute probably felt like an eternity. As you would probably expect, things went from bad to worse. As the night fell, the plane's power began to fail. The lights were flickering and then just went completely out, plunging the cabin into complete darkness. The hijackers, paranoid and desperate, believed that the commandos were about to storm the damn airplane. In a panic, they opened fire and threw grenades into the crowd of passengers. The scene that followed was pure chaos. Screams, smoke, blood, I mean, it was just a nightmare. The hijackers were shooting everyone they saw. The grenades blew holes into the side of the plane. Everyone's ears were ringing. People were running all over the plane trying to find a way out. Nirja once again trying to save the lives of others before her own. And in her final moments, she was shot while trying to guide passengers to safety. Like, hold on guys, do you actually know what type of person it takes to save the lives of strangers before your own? She was shot while trying to shield 3 children from the gunfire. Many passengers later said that the only reason they even survived was because of her. Anyways, back to the story. Outside the plane, Pakistani commandos were gearing up for a rescue operation.
Oh shit, Bill, should we go?
What do you think? They're killing the hostages. Is probably what they were saying to each other, because why the hell were they taking so goddamn long? When they finally stormed the aircraft, there were unalive bodies laid across the cabin, with the survivors in a state of complete shock. The hijackers were captured, but the damage they inflicted was too horrible to even think about. Out of 379 passengers, 20 were killed, and over 150 were injured. The 359 still alive were left with injuries and severe PTSD. After this tragic day, Narija Banat was awarded the Ashoka Chakra. I really hope I'm saying that correctly. I really want to be as respectful as possible. Anyways, this is the highest award for bravery the Indian government has. And man, it was all rightfully deserved. I mean, it's true what they say. Not all heroes wear capes.
These are some of the most brutal and terrifying ways that people have died in caves. And first up is the Shaft Cave disaster, where a group of scuba divers went to explore a flooded sinkhole only for some of them to never come back. The year is 1938, a few kilometers south of Mount Gambier. There's a field known as Thompson's Paddock, located on a farm near Allendale East. And on this typical day, a farmer is working on the field using equipment that is being pulled by horses, when all of a sudden one of his horses trips and stumbles on something in the grass. Confused, the farmer goes over to check to see what the heck just happened. This is where he sees a small hole in the ground, only about a foot wide. Not a big deal, right? Well, that's until he moved the dirt around, looked down, and saw that this hole was about 20 feet deep with a pool of water at the bottom. Now that is not normal. It was a limestone sinkhole. And for my slower little box heads watching this video, that means that there was an entire unexplored cavern below this field. I mean, just look at this map. The main chamber of this cavern is 460 feet long and 210 feet wide. To put that into some perspective, you could fit the Statue of Liberty in there and still have plenty of extra space. Two super long tunnels extend from the main room, the northwest tunnel reaching 260 feet in depth, and the eastern reaching over 400 feet. So, over the course of many years, word spread around and this hole in the ground became a spot of interest to divers and explorers. Now let's flash forward to 1973. A group of 9 divers arrive at Mount Gambier with the intention of exploring the shaft. Their goal was to explore the cave past where the light shines through the hole. Yep, in the complete darkness. From the hole in the ground, the sunlight would shine down directly into the shaft, giving the cavern a direct light beam that lit up the main area of the cavern. However, the tunnels on either side did not receive this sunlight because of, the angles of the ceiling. So the water was completely pitch black and difficult to explore, as you could probably imagine. Not to mention, no one had dived deep enough to really explore them in the first place. Ladies and box heads, this is where the 9 divers wanted to be the first to uncover the mysteries of these tunnels. May 27th, 1973, the 9 divers are standing at the entrance of the shaft, prepping the necessary equipment they will need for their practice dive. They wanted to get a feel for the cave and explore the main room before descending into the tunnels the next day. So, a few of the divers are lowered into the hole and their gear is lowered to them right after. Hey, are you guys alright down there? Never better, just get me a beer. They swim around the perimeter of the cavern just about 200 feet deep. Remember, this perimeter was the easy part of the dive. There was sunlight and it wasn't as deep as the tunnels that they were about to explore the next day. And after swimming around a bit, probably taking a piss in the water because, we've all done it, come on. The divers concluded their brief practice dive and ascended back to the surface. At this point, they're ready to enter the tunnels of the shaft. But they couldn't until the next morning because it was getting late and they needed the sunlight. So after they eagerly waited, they returned to the hole the next morning, ready to enter the cave and ready for whatever mysteries awaited for them, which they'll soon find out would be nothing but tragedy after tragedy. They set up their equipment above the hole and prepared themselves to make their descent once again. And actually, one of the 9 divers decided to sit out for the actual dive so that she could help with the equipment.
and other stuff from above the cave. Hey guys, I think I'm gonna sit this one out. I kind of want a chill night. Ah, come on, you pipsqueak. You don't want to be hundreds of feet under the surface in pitch black water? So they were now down to 8 divers, whose names were John Bockerman, Peter Burr, Larry Reynolds, Gordon Roberts, Robert Smith, and 3 siblings, Christine Millot, Glenn Millot, and Stephen Millot. Now, none of these divers that I just named were rookies or even unfamiliar with diving. They all had at least a few years of experience, with some of them even being considered experts, but not in caves. And especially not in a sinkhole like this. Anyway, the 8 divers are all lining up at the entrance, ready to finally explore the shaft. One by one, they're lowered down into the hole. Eventually, all of the divers reach the pool of water. They begin swimming down to the tunnel entrances, which are a bit deeper underwater. Everything's going smoothly, and the divers are super excited. They get to finally discover what lies in the tunnels as they swim along deeper and deeper. As they go deeper and deeper, things start to get darker and darker. That is until one of the divers, Robert Smith, starts to feel a little, funky. Guys, I'm not feeling too good. Yeah, once he reached about 180 feet below, the effects of nitrogen narcosis started to kick in. And for my slower box heads, it's a sickness caused by the pressure of diving in deep depths. It can pretty much make a person feel like they're drunk or impaired. And like I said earlier, these divers were experienced. So Robert was accustomed to the feeling of nitrogen narcosis. He was smart enough to signal to the rest of his crew and return back to the main chamber, where he then could ascend a bit higher and wait for the effects to wear off. Because trust me, you don't want to be diving any deeper once nitrogen narcosis has affected you. Like seriously, you start to think irrationally, you can't even think straight. Making the right decision becomes tough, and you may even make a decision that could end your life, which unfortunately we'll get to. Anyways, the rest of the group received and understood Robert's signal, but decided to continue their dive without him. Everyone else seemed to be feeling fine, so what could possibly go wrong? Robert is swimming around in circles, trying to wear off the effects of nitrogen narcosis, when suddenly he sees a flash of light in the distance. As the light gets closer and closer, he realizes that it must be the torchlight from one of his fellow divers. Eventually, the diver swims up to Robert. He can see now that it's Glenn Millot. Glenn grabs the gauge from his oxygen tank and shows it to Robert. The oxygen levels are practically 0. And at this point, Robert and Glenn were both running low on air in their tanks, which if you didn't know, you kind of need that. Knowing their dive time was almost up, they grouped together and swam up to the surface. The 2 men resurfaced with little to no air in their tanks, like any experienced diver would do. When they resurfaced, they also saw Larry Reynolds, who swam up around the same time for the same reason. Then about 30 seconds later, another diver surfaces, Peter Burr. But wait. If Robert, Glenn, Larry, and Peter were all on the surface with no air left in their tanks, that must mean that the other 4 divers should be out of air too, right? So where in the flying box head are they? The divers realize that something must have gone terribly wrong with the other divers. The rest of their group is still underwater with little to no air left. Immediately, a few of the divers surface and call 911. Their stomachs drop and the panic sets in, especially for Glenn Millot, whose brother and sister were still down there, Stephen and Christine. Without any hesitation, Glenn removes his empty oxygen tank. He quickly grabs a new tank and attaches it to his suit. He wants He needs to descend back down and find them. He refused to let his siblings stay down there any longer, knowing that they could be in danger. He's diving down as fast as he possibly can. He reaches 75 feet, then 150 feet, then 225 feet. Glenn then comes across a drop-off in the tunnel, kind of like an edge of a cliff. And there seems to be some kind of faint light shining from below. Glenn quickly swims over and looks down. He spots a torchlight and a camera. They're Stevens. Oh, thank God, he thinks to himself. That's gotta be a good sign, right? It means they're probably close. However, the visibility at the drop-off is, well, pitch black. between no sunlight and a thick cloud of silt from the rock walls. It was literally impossible for Glenn to even see a few inches in front of him. But a little darkness wasn't gonna stop him. Glenn was determined to find his brother and sister, and there was no way that he was just gonna let them die down there. So he swam down, searching for any sign of Steven or Christine. He can't see a damn thing. It's pitch black. He can't even see his hand in the front of his face. All Glenn was doing at this point was putting himself in danger. He can't stay down there any longer. With no other options, Glenn was forced to return to the main chamber, where at least there was sunlight so he could actually see something. Still, he stayed underwater, looking in every direction and praying his siblings would show any signs of life. Minutes go by and still nothing. No sign of Steven or Christine. Glenn checks his gauge and realizes he himself would run out of air soon if he didn't return to the surface. He is already on his second oxygen tank and is still running out of air. Imagine his poor friends and siblings who would still be on their first tank. Yeah, there is no way there's anything left in those tanks. In a panic, he swims up to the surface of the water. He calls up through the hole for the rest of the crew and they help bring him out of the narrow shaft entrance. On land, an ambulance has arrived, and this is where Glenn realizes that his siblings are long gone. There is no way they could have survived this long without air. Now it was just a matter of recovering their lifeless bodies. Glenn and the rest of the divers were heartbroken. Imagine losing your friends or even two of your own siblings in just a matter of minutes. Police arrive at the scene, but there's not much they can do right then and there. The recovery process would just be too challenging. They needed to take time to set up and plan. So, the next day, the police planned for a full body recovery. They entered the cavern and started searching around for the bodies of the 4 missing divers: Steven and Christine Millot, Gordon Roberts, and John Buckerman. But even the police couldn't find any signs of the bodies after a brief search. Again, the visibility was just still too poor down there, and going deep into the water was just dangerous. They were somehow still unprepared. After no luck, they look at each other and decide to come back tomorrow. And when tomorrow came, the next day. And again, they were unsuccessful. Yeah, days later, and still nothing was ever found. Eventually, days turned into months and still no sign of the missing bodies. That is until January 22nd, 1974. A whole 8 months after the incident. A documentary film crew who had filmed and explored other caves in the area came to visit the Shaft Cave. The crew entered the cavern and used their lighting equipment to turn the cave from dim to as bright as daylight. In, preparation to film their documentary. So bright actually that when one of the film technicians looked at his 2 crew members, he saw what seemed to be a third person in the distance. They were only swimming about 50 feet down. And like you would imagine, the film crew was pretty freaked out by this and went to swim over to investigate. They took a closer look at this person and quickly realized that this guy was not alive. It was a dead body in a wetsuit stuck under a narrow ledge. Jeez, that seems like something straight out of a horror movie, man. Freaked the hell out, the film crew left the shaft and called the police, telling them exactly where they saw the body. That body that they found was soon to be discovered as Steven Millot, who was found just 50 feet deep in the water stuck between a ledge. So now you're probably wondering, where the hell are the other bodies? We're still missing 3. Well, the landowners hired a team of professional divers to go and find Christine, Gordon, and John. And thankfully, it actually worked this time. They discovered the bodies of Christine and Gordon together. They were both about 185 feet down in the tunnel. John's body was discovered about 20 feet deeper beneath a ledge. But how did this even happen? How did these 4 experienced divers end up dying? Well, let's start with Christine and Gordon. Back when the rest of the divers were heading back to the main chamber of the cavern because of their, low air, Christine and Gordon were trying to do the same thing actually. However, they made a grave mistake. Instead of swimming along the diagonal slope of the tunnel, they swam straight up in an attempt to quickly ascend. They swam upwards into a dome in the ceiling, one that had no exit to it. Remember, the visibility was terrible down there. They could not see anything. So now they're trapped in this dome and likely suffering from the effects of nitrogen narcosis, which means they had no idea what to do or where to go. They were just trapped. They knew they were in a dangerous situation and they started to panic. They exhausted their air supply, using it up rather quickly from not being in the right state of mind either. And unfortunately, not long after, the 2 would drown before finding an exit. Reports suggest that Christine and Gordon were holding on to each other in their final moments, which most likely means that they knew they were going to die. Just imagine how scary that is. And as for John Bockerman, the body was found at the deepest of depths. What happened to him? Well, actually, the surviving divers recall seeing John swimming kind of confidently in the complete wrong direction. He was also likely under the effects of nitrogen narcosis and had no idea he was swimming down further and further, literally right to his death. John died underneath a rock ledge about 250 feet down in the water. And finally, the body of Stephen Millot, who is found the closest to the surface. Now, little is known about Stephen's death, but reports suggest that Stephen allowed himself to float to the ceiling of the tunnels by using a buoyancy device on his suit. As he floated upwards, he climbed along the walls, hoping that he was headed in the right direction. And he was actually, considering he was found at the highest depth out of everyone. But it's assumed that his air ran out before he was able to escape the water. And guys, this video only gets worse. Next up, we have the Veryovkina Cave incident, where a curious cave explorer decided to enter the world's deepest cave all by himself, only to find himself trapped thousands of feet below in the freezing cold. Yeah, that's right, the Veryovkina Cave is the deepest cave in the world, at least that we know of. It's located in the Gagra mountain ranges of Georgia. And no, not the state of Georgia, the country. You silly little boxhead. And guys, the cave's official depth is 7,247 feet. That's like really, really deep. Imagine being that deep in something. I know I can. Anyways, this diagram right here should give you some perspective. And to reach the entrance of this cave, you literally have to climb a mountain first. The altitude of the entrance itself is at 7,500 feet. And ladies and boxheads, let's meet the madman who decided to do all of this on his own. Sergei Kozeev, who is a 37-year-old man from Sochi, Russia, a city about 2 hours from the entrance of the cave. He was a frequent explorer who loved the outdoors and often went on solo expeditions. On November 1st, 2020, Sergei said goodbye to his wife and children, telling them that he was going on another one of his solo expeditions. However, he did not tell them where exactly he was going. He packed all of his equipment, including plenty of maps and documents that he spent a year gathering and planning for. He knew this expedition wouldn't be easy, but that didn't really stop him. He left Russia and started heading for Georgia, ready to climb the Gagra mountain range to eventually reach the entrance of the cave. The mountain climbing was the easy part of this expedition. With him though, he brought an ice axe and crampons. Get your head out of a gutter. I didn't say tampons, I said crampons. You know, those boots with the spiky bottoms that make it easy to climb. You get it. It wasn't long before Sergei reached the entrance of the Veryovkina Cave. He grabbed a rope out of the 3 bags of equipment he brought and attached it to the opening of the cave. Here, he would slowly lower himself and his equipment down into the dark and narrow passage. Yep, did I mention he did this all by himself? He traversed the cave successfully, seemingly without any issues for quite a while. He eventually came across the first camp in the cave, about 600 meters or nearly 2,000 feet down. These camps were permanently set up by other cavers before to provide a base, for new explorers, allowing them to rest before they continue on, because traversing this cave seriously was not easy. If you remember the diagram, most of the cave is long, vertical shafts. That sounds almost inappropriate. Anyways, probably feeling super confident and thinking to himself, shh, that's nothing. Sergei continues right past the first camp, not stopping for too long. He continues to descend down the cave, doing more and more climbing, until Sergei eventually reaches another camp. The second one is about 1,000 meters or 3,300 feet down. At this point, he's getting pretty deep in the cave. But after climbing for quite a while, he decided that he needs to rest. After all, he's doing all of this, everything completely alone. There's no one else in the cave to help him. So he takes a break at the second camp. Sergei would then spend approximately 1 week at the second base camp. Okay. Up until this point, things seem to have gone pretty smoothly for him. But that's probably because he hadn't reached the real challenging parts of this cave. The parts that can easily kill an unprepared caver. From this point forward, the vertical shafts are a lot more intense and challenging to climb. Not to mention the cave also gets a lot colder and wetter the deeper you go. So after his week of long rest, Sergey is feeling confident again and wants to continue his descent downwards. He packs up his equipment and starts to head down yet again. And well, this is where things start to go horribly wrong for Sergey. To start, Sergey did not have the proper equipment needed to accomplish his expedition. A mistake that would cost him his life. Any caver knows that one of the most necessary items is to have a waterproof outfit, with a nice warm fleece inside to keep you all warm and snuggly from any water. And well, Sergey did not have any waterproof layer of clothing. Another thing he was missing were stirrups, which are basically footholds for his feet. Seems pretty damn important while climbing down, you know, the deepest cave on Earth. Anyways, as he descends down the cave, the temperature gets colder and the climbing becomes way more narrow and intense. Like I mentioned earlier, but Sergey still thinks he's gonna be just fine. That is until he reaches a small pool of water. At this point, he's already pretty damn cold without touching any of it, so he knows that getting himself wet would be nothing but guaranteed hypothermia. Without that waterproof layer of clothing, he knows that he genuinely cannot go any further in the cave. This is where Sergey begins to panic. Already well over 1,100 meters deep into this cave, Sergey realizes that he has no other option but to ascend back to the top, or at least to the nearest camp. While hanging on to the rope, he tries to pull himself back up. Nothing is working. Without those footholds, he can't get any traction to ascend upwards. Uh-oh. He desperately tries to pull himself up over and over again. The vertical shaft he was in was already a specifically challenging and narrow area to climb. But the fact that he had no footholds is what really screwed him over. Seriously, he just couldn't physically climb high enough to escape this area. So after trying to pull himself out for God knows how long, Sergey is completely drained of energy. His body begins to freeze up. He is feeling the pressure of the situation. It's all taking a major toll on his body. He knows he must stop now. Otherwise, there's no chance of him escaping ever. Sergey decides to get some rest and try ascending again when he wakes up, praying that he still has a chance at survival. However, there was no chance for him. As he shut his eyes, he's unaware that it would be the final time he would ever fall asleep. Because ladies and box heads, unfortunately, Sergey Koziv would die of hypothermia in his sleep. Yep, he spent his final moments trapped over 1,100 meters below the surface, completely alone, cold, and scared. But hold on, even though Sergey is no longer alive, this is not where the story ends. Because the retrieval of his body makes for a whole other horror story itself. Let's flash forward about 8 months to August of 2021. A research team by the name of Perovo is headed to the entrance of the cave. They start their descent down, and on the way they see something pretty weird. They spot an ice axe and a pair of crampons about 1,300 feet down. And you guessed it, they were Sergey's exact ones. However, the team was kind of confused. Because how did these items even get there? Who did they belong to? Are they even still alive? Now, concerned that someone could be in danger in the cave, the team continues their descent downwards, while keeping an eye out for anyone down there. About 3,600 feet down, the team starts to smell something a little, funky. I don't know if funky is the right word, definitely not a pleasant smell. They search around the cave and continue to descend downwards until they finally see it. A dead body still attached to a rope. Little did they know it was the body of Sergey Koziv. A body that has been decomposing in this cave for months. The team returns to the surface and lets the authorities know that there is a body trapped thousands of feet down in the cave. It was going to be quite a tough process to recover Sergey's body. I mean, between the deep depth and the narrow shafts of the cave, it was going to take lots of people to help to even retrieve it. Over 100 people to be exact. So they form a rescue team of cavers and they get right to it. They try retrieving Sergey's body in one piece, but realize that's not going to be possible. Yeah, they were forced to cut his body into pieces in order to successfully remove it from the cave. So they chop up his body. Then, once his body was on the surface, the pieces of his decomposed body were gathered together and sent to his wife and kids back in Sokchi. And guys, let the story of Sergei Koziev be a warning. Don't go caving alone, or just don't go at all. This video is about children who brutally killed their own families and will probably make you think twice about ever having kids. So, let's go in raw. Jasmine Richardson. This first child killer was a 12-year-old girl who slaughtered her entire family so she could run away with her 23-year-old werewolf boyfriend. Yeah, I'm not even kidding about this. It's April 2006 and 12-year-old Jasmine is going through her little emo rebel phase that apparently every teenager went through back then, spending way too much time on the early internet. But outside of her internet emo persona, she lived a seemingly normal, happy life with a great family. They all lived in Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada. No, I'm not even kidding. This place is really called Medicine Hat. Mark and Deborah Richardson were the parents of Jasmine, as well as her 8-year-old little brother Tyler. Those who knew the Richardsons described them as an average, peaceful family, including Jasmine, who, well, we'll get into why we already know that's not true. Like I said earlier, Jasmine was spending a little bit too much time on the internet, especially for a 12-year-old girl. She signed up for profiles on typical websites of the time like MySpace, but also on more unknown sites like VampireFreaks.com. VampireFreaks.com, people. Yeah, pretty weird, but like she was literally 12 years old. I probably would have just watched box set videos when I was 12, but hey, to each their own, I guess. Subscribe. On these sites, Jasmine was posting images of herself wearing goth clothing, heavy eye makeup, and she would even pose with fake guns. It was clear that she had quite an interest in the punk lifestyle, which unfortunately leads us to the first steps of the brutal murders of her parents and her little brother. But why? How does being goth lead to her entire family being goddamn murdered? Well, you little boxhead, let me tell you about a rather interesting emo guy that Jasmine was about to meet. With a few of her friends, Jasmine would regularly attend rock concerts. And at one of these shows, she meets a 23-year-old man. His name was Jeremy Steinke. Jeremy was a high school dropout who lived in a trailer park with his mother, was a very, very avid weed smoker, and was also abused as a child. Yeah, all of this sounds like a recipe for goddamn disaster, people. But hold on, get this. He genuinely described himself as a 300-year-old werewolf. Yup. And he was dead goddamn serious too. No, I mean seriously, this guy even wore a vial of blood around his neck at all times, telling people that he enjoyed the taste of it. Damn, and I thought I was freaky. Anyways, Jasmine introduces herself to Jeremy as a 15-year-old, rather than her true age, 12 years old. Not like that's any better, especially to a 23-year-old goddamn man. But as we know, the werewolf dude over here didn't really care, and seemed to like the fact that Jasmine was kind of young. Bro, this guy would have been a great goddamn Minecraft YouTuber. Nope. Hey, don't attack me. You know them Minecraft YouTubers be getting. They be crossing some lines. After the two meet in person, they begin chatting online nearly every day. They grew super close and even became involved romantically. As an older guy, Jeremy found it easy to pursue someone of Jasmine's young age. You goddamn creep. On the other hand, Jasmine just wanted to feel a connection and was desperate to have her first love. I mean, come on, all of us were like that when we were young. I'm still waiting. Jeremy, being the old and wise goth that he was, heavily influenced and even pressured Jasmine into keeping up with her dark, gothy punk aesthetic. And of course, Jasmine complies. She begins to double down on her emo-ness, becoming even more involved in creepy sites online. And she even started wearing more revealing punk clothing in her real life. As a result, her family and the people around her start to notice this sudden shift in Jasmine's personality. Mark and Deborah Richardson, Jasmine's parents, became suspicious with their daughter's behavior and decided to do some snooping. as any parent would. And in the weeks leading up to their murder in April 2006, they discovered that a 23-year-old man had been in contact with their young little daughter. Obviously, they would freak the hell out. I mean, who the hell wouldn't? They just found out that a weird, creepy-looking older werewolf guy was not just talking with, but very inappropriately involved with their little girl. So Jasmine's parents immediately banned her from contacting Jeremy ever again. No calling, no texting, no rock shows, absolutely goddamn nothing. And Jasmine, being the typical teenager that she was, saw this as her parents separating her from her love life. I hate you, Mom, you're ruining my life. Don't worry, honey, it's just a phase. She'll grow out of it. They were goddamn wrong. Knowing how this story ends, it's pretty obvious that Jasmine and Jeremy's relationship didn't end there. Remember that little site vampirefreaks.com? Well, the two forbidden lovers actually found a way to communicate through it. Using fake-ass usernames, they carefully continued to chat through the website, leaving Jasmine's parents completely unaware. But Jasmine wasn't off the hook just yet. Her parents were keeping a very close eye on her outside life, always knowing where she was or who she was with. They even drove her to and from school, all with one goal in mind: no meeting Jeremy. The fact that the two wouldn't be able to see each other without her parents knowing infuriated the both of them. And this, ladies and box heads, is when the planning of the Richardson family murders began. Through their little freaky vampire website, Jasmine messages her boyfriend saying, "So, I have this plan. It starts with killing them and ends with me living with you." Jeremy, who was probably delighted to hear this, accepted her crazy plan. Together, they conspired through online messages to murder the Richardson family in their own goddamn home. April 22nd, 2006. A heavily intoxicated and drugged up Jeremy makes his way to the Richardson family home in Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada. He's dressed in all black and a ski mask so no one sees him. I wonder what TV show he got that from. Our original buddy. Jasmine secretly lets Jeremy inside the house and then retreats back upstairs to her bedroom. I guess she didn't want to see the murder of her family that she literally planned out. All alone now, Jeremy makes his way into the basement of the house. Not very quietly though, because he is super drunk. Alright, fine, boxheads, I'll give it to him here. This guy was definitely more of a werewolf than a goddamn ninja. Anyways, Jasmine's mother, 48-year-old Deborah Richardson, was in this basement, doing a load of laundry like it was any, typical kind of day. Jeremy sees her and remembers the plan that he and his girlfriend constructed. Every Richardson must die tonight. Suddenly, Jeremy emerges from the shadows of the dark basement holding a 6-inch folding knife. Deborah screams at the top of her lungs as this masked man lunges at her and attacks her. Unfortunately, she would succumb to her wounds after being stabbed 12 times in the chest by Jeremy. You heard me right, people! 12 goddamn times! Because of Jeremy's loud attack and Deborah's piercing screams, the rest of the family had been woken up. Jasmine's father, 42-year-old Mark Richardson, immediately grabs a screwdriver and makes his way down to the basement in a hurry, worried that his wife might be in trouble. Little did he know what was coming. Mark rushes down to the basement and finds blood everywhere. On the walls, on the floor, and as soon as he looked over there, he saw a random man in a ski mask standing over his dead wife with a bloody knife in his hands. Scared, Mark turns around and starts sprinting up the stairs. But he wasn't fast enough. He feels the hands of Jeremy grabbing him back down, followed by the pain of a knife plunging into his back. Jeremy stabs Mark 9 times in the back. But Mark doesn't let up easily. He fights to save not only his life, but the lives of his children as well. With all of the remaining strength that he had, an adrenaline-fueled, terrified Mark tries his hardest to injure his attacker in any way possible. He desperately hits Jeremy and even tries to gouge his eyes out, but none of it works. This intoxicated, drugged-up werewolf man doesn't seem to feel any pain. Eventually, Jeremy grabs his knife and stabs Mark again, this time in his chest and abdomen area. Before Mark takes his last breath, he is able to weakly mutter one word to Jeremy: "Why?" Not even knowing that this masked killer was his daughter's secret boyfriend. Jeremy then replied, "Because your daughter wanted it this way." Mark's eyes then shut forever, dying in the pool of his own blood. Jasmine's father suffered 13 stab wounds to the front of his body and 9 wounds to his back at the hands of Jeremy. So now we got 2 dead Richardsons in the basement. But as we know, the Richardsons were a family of 4, and if Jasmine planned it, then that leaves 1 Richardson left, 8-year-old Tyler. While Jeremy was in the basement dealing with Jasmine's parents, part of their twisted plan was for Jasmine to distract her little brother. In Tyler's upstairs bedroom, the siblings are waiting for Jeremy to handle his business in the basement. But of course, little Tyler did not know what was going on. While carrying the dripping, bloody knife used to kill Mark and Deborah, Jeremy made his way up the stairs to meet his 12-year-old girlfriend and eliminate their last target. When Jeremy enters the bedroom, he hands Jasmine the same knife that he used to murder her parents. He then forcefully grabs and pins down the 8-year-old. While he's held down on this bed by this grown man, Tyler cries and pleads for his life to his sister. I mean, seriously, what kind of person could listen to the cries of an innocent child, much less their own brother, and still want to murder them? Gosh. Tyler can't move, his whole body is restrained, and he is terrified. Imagine a grown, masked man holding you down while your own big sister does nothing to protect you. This poor little kid probably had no idea that his sister was behind all of this. Well, until she held the knife over him. Yeah, this girl is absolutely disgusting. So with zero care for Tyler's pleading, Jasmine then drives the 6-inch knife into little Tyler's chest. But he actually survives this blow to the chest. The boy was making gargling sounds and was still able to move around. If Jasmine had any remorse in her heart, she could have changed her mind right there and then. She could have called it all off and saved her little brother's life. But no, this evil little girl had her mind made up. Her whole family had to die that night. Jasmine then hands the knife back to her boyfriend. Jeremy takes the blade and slashes the little boy's throat wide open, killing him instantly. The blood from the slash sprayed all over the kid's toys in his room. Talk about goddamn disgusting. Some reports even say that in an attempt to defend himself from his sister and her boyfriend, the 8-year-old actually grabbed a toy lightsaber. How could someone even do this? The kid tried to defend himself with a lightsaber. Like, this is just a terrible story. In the end, Tyler Jacob Richardson was stabbed 5 times, with a severe laceration to his throat. With this death, that left the entire Richardson family members dead, besides one, of course. I mean, it was exactly what Jeremy and Jasmine wanted. A life free of annoying parents who in reality just wanted to protect their daughter and make sure she was safe. After the murders were finished, the 2 lovers fled the area without any remorse, leaving a house full of dead bodies behind. They hitched a ride from a friend and just tried to get as far away from the house as possible. It wasn't until the next day when the 8-year-old child of a neighbor saw Deborah's dead body through a window. That's when the police were called. The police initially suspected a home invasion and the entire family had been killed on the night of April 22nd. But as the cops walked around the house, they came across family photos and started noticing a face in the photos who, well, wasn't dead in the house. The police quickly realized that there was a 4th missing member of the Richardson family. An Amber Alert was sent out for Jasmine Richardson, and her name was everywhere. On the news, of course. People were actually concerned for her safety, thinking that she might have been abducted by home invaders. No one would have imagined the real goddamn story. Once the police had found Jasmine's computer, they were able to read through her messages and found a graphic drawing of her family dying. And ladies and box heads, that's when they began to put together the real story. As the police read further and further into the messages, they discovered that Jasmine was actually the mastermind behind these awful, disgusting, brutal murders. They found where she first brought up the idea to her boyfriend and how he so eagerly complied. They now knew that she wasn't a victim. So, the police set out to find and arrest the 2 lovers. And because of the Amber Alert, Jasmine and Jeremy were spotted about 80 miles away, in Leader, Saskatchewan, Canada. They were seen casually hanging out with friends, cuddling, kissing, bragging, and acting like nothing bad had happened while eating in a restaurant. So, the police were called and the 2 were arrested. In court, Jasmine Richardson was convicted of 3 counts of murder. However, because she was only 12 years old at the time of the crime, the maximum punishment she could have served in prison was only 10 years. So, Box says she was actually released in 2016 and she has been a free woman ever since. And fun fact, but not really fun, Jasmine Richardson is the youngest person to ever be convicted of a triple murder in Canada. As for Jeremy Steinke, well, they didn't go as easy on a grown-ass man. Excuse me, werewolf. He was found guilty for 3 counts of murder and sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences in prison. I guess you can say Jeremy would never see a full moon again, huh? Bad joke.
Erin Caffey. This next child killer orchestrated the vicious murder of her whole family using guns and samurai swords. Yeah. March 1st, 2008. 4 members of the Caffey family are sound asleep in their beds when 2 men break into their home. These men would then carry out brutal attacks on the family, resulting in the murders of the mother and her 2 young sons. A gruesome murder plan that was later discovered to be ordered by the Caffey family's own 16-year-old daughter, Erin. But before we get into more graphic detail, let me give you some background information, as we typically do. It's the fall of 2007 in the small town of Alba, Texas. Not to be cliche, but it's one of those quiet towns where everyone knows each other and nothing crazy ever really happens. Alba was full of tradition, God-fearing religious families who never missed church on a Sunday, including the Caffeys, a typical southern family of 5. 41-year-old Terry Caffey and 38-year-old Penny Caffey were the parents of 3 children. 13-year-old Matthew, 8-year-old Tyler, and their eldest child, 16-year-old Erin Caffey. Erin was a great student, regularly went to church, and had the voice of an angel, they say, as she would usually sing in the church choir. She seems to be a good kid on a path to success. So now you're probably wondering, if everything was all sunshine and rainbows for Erin Caffey, what exactly went wrong in her life and gave her these murderous thoughts? How in goddamn hell did she end up killing her goddamn family? Well, it all starts out when Erin meets her soon-to-be murder accomplice, Charlie Wilkinson. Just about 5 months before the murders, Erin meets 18-year-old Charlie while she's working a shift at her part-time fast food job. He was a couple years older than her and apparently Erin's type. So the two developed a romantic relationship that moved pretty goddamn quickly. Erin and Charlie spent all of their time together, becoming basically inseparable. And only after a couple of months of dating, Charlie actually proposed to Erin with a promise ring. Thankfully, they didn't actually get married, but it goes to show how head over heels they were for each other. Meaning they would do anything. And I mean seriously anything for one another. Now, this is where things start to take a dark turn. Erin's parents were not very fond of their daughter's boyfriend. He was antisocial, rude, and was the cause of Erin's rebellious phase over the past few months. Their once sweet and ambitious daughter had become closed off to them, and even began slipping up in school. Erin's parents decided that school was far more important to Erin's life than her boyfriend. Reasonably so. So, they demanded that Charlie and Erin break up. But oh boy, they did not realize just how in love this couple really was. Charlie was infuriated with the idea of having to break up with his girlfriend and suggested that Erin actually run away with him. However, Erin had a much more sinister idea in her mind. Erin wholeheartedly believed that the only way for her and Charlie to stay together was if they somehow murdered the entire Caffey family. That's right, the entire family, including her innocent younger brothers. So, Erin tries convincing Charlie of what they have to do in order to be together, and well, it actually works because Charlie agrees to help kill the whole family. But they knew they wouldn't be able to get the job done by themselves. I mean, there were 4 members of the family to kill, and Erin didn't want to do any of the killing by herself, which would leave Charlie to kill 4 people on his own. So Erin and Charlie did what any normal psychopathic teenagers would do and convinced even more people to help them with their plan of killing the entire family. They recruited one of Charlie's friends, 20-year-old Charles Wade, to help them with the actual killing part of the plan. Then they had Charles's girlfriend, 18-year-old Bobby Johnson, act as the getaway driver. Yeah, let's just fast forward to March 1st, 2008, at around 3 a.m.
Aaron's parents, Terry and Penny, were sound asleep in their bed. That is until their bedroom door slams open, disrupting them from their sleep. Before Aaron's parents even knew what was going on or who'd even opened the door, two men forcefully rushed into the room. Confused and terrified, the Caffey parents screamed in fear for their lives, unaware of the horrors that were about to unfold. Without any hesitations, the intruders started firing .22 caliber rifle bullets at the defenseless Caffey parents. 1 second, the parents were peacefully sleeping, and the next, they were in a pool of their own blood, fighting for their lives. Terry, Aaron's father, is shot multiple times in the chest as he throws his body over his wife to try and protect her. The attackers then shoot Terry in the face, causing him to fall off the bed and onto the floor. Unfortunately, Terry wouldn't be able to protect his wife as he lays in the pool of his own blood on the floor. He tries mustering all the strength in his body to get up, to speak, to do anything, but he can't. Terry had been shot a total of 11 times and was severely injured. Meanwhile, his wife Penny just laid on the blood-soaked bed as the killers continued to load her body up with bullets. But as scared as she was, she didn't give up easily either. In fact, the attackers got super frustrated when Penny just wouldn't die from the bullets. And remember when I mentioned a goddamn samurai sword at the beginning of this section? Well, this is when that sword is used. One of the attackers takes the sword and aligns it with the middle of poor Penny's throat. Already covered in gunshot wounds, Penny has no strength left to defend herself. Knowing what he must do next, the man slowly lowers the sharp blade closer and closer to his victim. He then plunges the blade right into her neck and slashes it out of the side. Blood sprays everywhere. This brutal action nearly decapitates the poor woman. Unfortunately, Penny Caffey had no chance of survival from this brutal attack. She died right there in that bloody bed at the hands of Charlie and Charles. But Aaron Caffey, her own daughter, was really the one with blood on her hands. Despite being shot 11 times, the father, Terry Caffey, was actually still alive on the floor and heard the whole thing. I mean, can you even imagine having to witness the truly evil murder of your wife and hardly clinging on to the life of yourself? And to make things worse, the attackers were now headed upstairs toward the Caffey children's bedrooms, ready to do the same thing to Terry's children. While falling in and out of consciousness, Terry could hear the loud footsteps of the two men going up the stairs. He desperately wanted to save his kids' lives, but he was way too injured to move fast enough and was slipping in his own blood. Upstairs, the men quickly burst into 13-year-old Matthew Caffey's bedroom. Immediately, Matthew recognizes one of the assailants as Charlie, his older sister's boyfriend. And after hearing the traumatic screams of his mother and father just a few moments before, Matthew knew exactly what was coming. Completely terrified, Matthew begged and pleaded with Charlie to spare his life. He cried as he begged him, "No, Charlie, please don't do this," and asked him, "Why are you doing this?" The men, unfazed by the child's begging, shot him right in the face and his neck. Silence. After killing Matthew, they rushed over to the next room to kill the youngest kid in the family, 8-year-old Tyler Caffey. God, these people are just disgusting. Tyler had been hiding in the closet of his older sister's room. This poor, innocent kid had heard all of the attacks that came before him, so he hid, praying that he wouldn't be found. Tyler sat in that dark closet alone, terrified, knowing that no one in his family would be there to protect him. Could you just imagine the fear that this kid probably felt? Sadly, Charlie and Charles eventually found Tyler in that closet. They grabbed the boy out of the closet, pushed him onto the ground, and oh god, this is hard to say. They took turns stabbing their samurai swords into the 8-year-old's body. Satisfied with their sick killings, Charlie and Charles then went around the house collecting any valuables or cash they could find. Aaron and Charlie actually planned to pay their accomplice Charles with the $2,000 that was stashed somewhere in the Caffey home. Once the job was done, of course. Then the killers doused the home with lighter fluid and set the whole damn place on fire. Yeah, surely that wouldn't draw any attention to the horrific crimes that they just committed there. Anyways, remember how I told you that Terry Caffey, Aaron's father, had actually survived? Yeah, well, he wasn't free to go just yet. This poor guy had to fight his way out of a burning building after being shot 11 times.
right after his youngest son Tyler was just killed. Terry realized that his whole family was probably dead. He even assumed that his daughter Erin had been killed too. We'll get into that in a second. But Terry couldn't just handle this idea of his family being gone. He stops fighting and just, well, gives up. He collapses into his own pool of blood on the bedroom floor and falls unconscious. However, thanks to that fire Charlie and Charles had set in the house, Terry wakes up. His body feels hot and he's no longer just choking on blood, but on smoke too. He realizes that the house is on fire and if he doesn't get out now, he will die this time. With all of the strength he could possibly muster, Terry drags his body through the bedroom and pulls himself out of a window. Thankfully, Terry and Penny's bedroom was only on the first floor. As the house is literally burning down behind him, Terry crawls almost a quarter of a mile to his neighbor's house. With 11 gunshot wounds and thinking his whole family was dead, he was fighting to get to safety for one reason. That was more than just his own survival. For the simple fact that he knew the identity of one of the killers. Remember when Terry's older son Matthew was killed? Remember how he was specifically begging Charlie not to kill him? Well, Terry actually heard all of that and just knew. Right then and there, he knew that his daughter's boyfriend was the goddamn killer. And Terry would do anything to make sure he was identified. When he arrives at his neighbor's house, Terry tells his neighbor, Tommy Gaston, that Charlie did it. Tommy frantically calls the police. Listen to this.
Alright, sir, I have a few questions that I need to ask you, okay? We're gonna get you an ambulance. I need you to stay on the line with me, okay? Are you with the patient now?
Yes.
How old is he?
He's 41.
Is he conscious?
Yes.
And is he breathing?
Yes.
Okay. When did this happen?
I don't know, just a little bit ago. And we've also got a house on fire out here.
And the house is on fire? Is the person who shot him still nearby, sir?
Yes, he's right here at me.
You shot him?
No, I didn't. I don't know any more details. I've got to hang up and help him.
Sir, I have to ask you these questions. Okay, they're en route. Is there any serious bleeding?
Yes, he's bleeding.
Okay, is he completely awake?
Yes, he's awake.
Okay, what part of the body was injured?
I don't know, but I've got to go.
Sir, I need to know where he was shot.
Do what?
I need to know where he was shot at.
I don't know.
So while all of this is happening in the Caffey family home, where the hell is the mastermind herself, Erin Caffey? Well, she was just waiting in the car with her getaway driver, Bobby Johnson. Erin, in an impatient tone while just waiting in the car, can they hurry up? How long are they gonna take in there? Once Charlie and Charles had finished up the murdering part of the plan and drove away in the car, Erin literally shouted, "Holy shit, that was awesome." And no, I'm not making that line up. She had actually said that about her family being murdered. To all my little box heads listening to this, guys, don't ever grow up to be this girl. Anyways, they all fled to Charles's trailer to get a good night's sleep. After, a casual extermination of an entire family because of Terry's 911 call not long before. The police were searching for Charlie Wilkinson. It wasn't long after the murders that they found him holed up in Charles's trailer. They arrested Charles thinking that would, be the end of it. What they didn't expect was to find a 16-year-old blonde girl also in the trailer. Yep. That girl was in fact Erin Caffey. You would think that Erin knew that there was no escaping at this point, right? Well, the plot thickens again. Her boyfriend had been arrested, the police were going to interrogate him, and their master plan would be investigated. But nope, for some reason Erin had the high hopes that she could actually get away with the murders. So when the police found her, Erin tried to play it off like she was kidnapped, unsure of where she was. She claimed that she'd been drugged and had no idea that her family was just killed. And honestly, it kind of worked. The police felt sympathy for her, thinking that she was genuinely a lost, kidnapped little girl who had just lost her entire family and that she was just freaking out. But hey, we all know after watching this section of the video, that's definitely not goddamn true. After running multiple tests on Erin, they discovered that she was lying about being drugged. And in fact, knew a lot about the murders. That sympathy? Yeah, that was all gone now. The police had stopped viewing Erin as a poor little victim and instead embraced the idea that she could be a suspect. Then she blamed Charlie for the initial idea of the plan while Charlie and the rest of the crew put all the blame on Erin. I mean, it was her idea.
Till this very day, Aaron Caffey denies ever being the mastermind behind this crime. The 4 involved in the Caffey's family murders all pleaded guilty in court. Bobby Johnson, the getaway driver, got 40 years in prison. Charles Wade and Charlie Wilkinson both were sentenced to life without parole. And the puppet master herself, Aaron Caffey, was sentenced to life in prison with the chance of parole after 25 years. Now, Wilkinson and Wade were actually going to face the death penalty for their crimes. Let me actually know in the comments what you think about the death penalty. Are you guys for it, against it? I just want to know. It wasn't until none other than the surviving victim, Terry Caffey himself, testified for the killers of his family to not receive the death penalty as a punishment. Terry was a man of God and strongly believed in forgiveness. Yes, this man had his whole family killed and had it in his heart to forgive them. Man, I can't say I would be the same. Jake Evans. This next child killer was inspired to murder his family after watching a goddamn movie. And once he actually did it, he called the police on himself. Meet 17-year-old Jake Evans, a kid who was about to shoot his mother and sister to death in their home in Aledo, Texas. Jake was born on May 22nd, 1995 to Daryl and Jamie Evans. He was a middle child and their only son. He had 3 sisters, 15-year-old Mallory, his older sister Audrey, and the eldest Emily. Growing up, Jake was never described as a kid with violent tendencies. He was quiet, respectful, and never gave anyone the impression that he would ever do something so evil. So why the hell did he kill his mom and younger sister? Well, it all started just a few hours before the murders took place. It's October 2nd, 2012, and Jake is relaxing and eating some lunch in front of the television in his Texas home. He was watching the slasher horror movie Halloween. You know, the one with Michael Myers. Specifically the 2007 Halloween film directed by Rob Zombie. Nothing out of the ordinary, right? Why is this even important? Well, this movie actually features a 10-year-old version of the infamous fictional killer Michael Myers. Young Michael goes around killing multiple members of his family with zero remorse. This absolutely fascinated Jake. He was so intrigued with the fact that a young kid could kill people without any emotion. Hey, Jake buddy, you know Michael Myers wasn't a real person, right? As he watched the film for the 3rd time just that week, he couldn't help but imagine what it would be like to kill someone. Or someone even in his family. Jake believed that he'd be just like Michael Myers after murdering someone. No remorse, no emotion, so he decided to test that theory out. That night, as Jake sat in his living room, he constructed a plan. His initial idea was to murder his whole family the next morning. Like the entire family. He wanted to kill his younger sister, then his mother, then his oldest sister, then his grandparents, and then his other older sister. Man, I almost ran out of breath there. But yeah, this kid had quite the plan. Anyways, after coming to terms with the fact that he would kill his entire family within the next 24 hours, Jake then goes upstairs to his bedroom to watch some good old Family Guy. Then, at around 4:15 a.m., Jake's 15-year-old sister Mallory knocks on his bedroom door. She asks him if he wants to watch a movie with her. Jake declines. He was upset with his younger sister because she had made some racist remarks earlier that day. He even called her hold on, let me get the exact words here, racist for the things that she said, which I will definitely not be repeating because I kind of like my job on YouTube. Yeah, it's kind of confusing. Jake may have liked murderers, but he did not like racists. This conversation seemed to upset Jake quite a bit. Once his sister left, retreating to her bedroom next door, Jake rushed down the stairs. He opened the door to his parents' closet and was looking for something specific. And there it was, his dad's blue foldable knife. And just in case you were wondering, Jake's dad was away on a business trip while all of this was happening. It's why Jake never mentioned him in his murder plan. Anyways, Jake grabs the knife and quickly rushes back up the stairs and to his bedroom. With the knife in his hands, Jake paces around his room, thinking intently about his plan. He contemplates ending his sister's life right then and there. He didn't want to wait all the way to the morning like he had planned. The thought of causing his sister pain right now was just too strong. So Jake exits his bedroom and walks over to the room next door. At 9:30 p.m., he knocks on the door of his sister's bedroom and now asks if she wants to watch a movie. Jake fake happy and smiling. Hey sis, I changed my mind. Let's watch a movie. Mallory confused. Okay, what's behind your back then? Oh, nothing. The two head down to the living room and sit on the couch like it was just any other night. They turn on the TV and throw on a movie in the back. Jake continuously runs his fingers over the knife hidden in his pocket while the movie plays in the background. He seriously couldn't bring himself to pay attention to whatever was happening on the TV screen. Over and over, the intrusive thoughts of killing his sister just flooded Jake's mind as he sat right next to her on that couch. And after thinking really hard about it, he decided not to. Well, not yet at least. Jake believed that his sister didn't really deserve to feel any pain when he killed her. So he decided to switch his knife out for a different murder weapon, a gun. And not to mention, at this point, Jake knew that if he impatiently killed his sister, he would have to kill the other victims soon too. This included Jake's mother, who was the only other person in the house with Jake and Mallory at the time. Jake gets up from the couch while the movie continues to play and makes his way downstairs. He heads to his closet and retrieves a revolver. Jake had stolen this gun from his grandfather at an earlier time, then stashed it away in this closet. For a while, Jake paces around the house, trying to come to terms with what he was about to do. He plays with the gun, opening and closing the cylinder of the revolver as he, thinks. And well, Jake accepts the fact that he was gonna do it. He is 100% sure he is going to kill his family tonight. 11:15 p.m. In the upstairs hallway of Jake and Mallory's bedrooms, Jake stands outside of his younger sister's bedroom door with the revolver hidden behind his back. He knocks at Mallory's bedroom door, but this time it wasn't to just ask to watch a movie. When she opens the door, he tells his sister that she needs to go downstairs to help their mother with something. As the 15-year-old girl walks past her brother, she turns her back to him. Jake raises his arm and aims the revolver, putting his own sister in between the sights of the gun. Mallory sees her older brother out of the corner of her eye. Terrified, she questions Jake, hoping that he's just playing some kind of sick joke on her. She tells Jake that she was getting kind of freaked out by him and that he should put the gun down. But that didn't stop this psycho from pulling the trigger. Jake shoots his own sister in the back. She falls to the ground, screaming in pain. A pool of Mallory's blood begins to fill the floor of the upstairs hallway. Jake stands over Mallory's injured body and looks down at her, wanting to make sure that she really dies. Jake raises his arm again, aiming the revolver at his sister yet again. He puts another bullet into his sister, this time in her head. But for some sick reason, that wasn't enough for Jake. There was still someone else in the house that he had to kill. Jake quickly makes his way downstairs to his mother's study. He flings the door open and sees his mother standing in the room. His mother, Jamie Evans, stood there confused and scared. She had heard the previous gunfire upstairs and could only expect the goddamn worst. She was actually about to investigate the loud and unexpected shots right before Jake arrived. This time, without any hesitation, Jake lifts the gun and starts firing in his mother's direction. He shoots her 3 times. The images of Jake's sister and mother laying in the pools of their own blood constantly replayed in Jake's mind. He couldn't believe what he had just done. He paced around his bedroom, screaming, shooting bullets into random objects, and just flat out freaking the hell out. The kid knew he messed up. To make things worse, he could hear gargling sounds coming from the hallway. Yeah, his little sister Mallory wasn't dead yet. Having to go through it all again, Jake returns to his suffering sister, who is barely holding on to her life on the hallway floor. As she chokes on her own blood, he fires another bullet into her head, this time killing her. And just to make sure his mother was also dead, he put another bullet into her head as well. Yeah, Jake couldn't do that again. He tested the theory that he would feel no remorse if he murdered someone, and it wasn't true. I feel like it was kind of obvious that, dude, you're not Michael Myers, you're Jake Evans, you're going to feel bad. Anyways, he felt awful about his actions and called off the rest of his plans. Jake knew that he wouldn't be able to go through with the murders of his grandparents and older sisters. So he picks up the phone and dials 911. As he stands in the Evans family living room, somehow completely calm and emotionless, Jake tells the operator everything. But ladies and box heads, the way this kid confessed was almost as scary as the crimes themselves. I mean, just listen to this 911 call.
I just killed my mom and my sister.
What?
I just killed my mom and my sister.
You just killed your mother and your sister? How did you do that?
I shot him with a .22 revolver.
And what is your name?
Jake Evans.
Jake Evans was then arrested after fully admitting to the murders that took place in his home. In a plea agreement, Jake was sentenced to 45 years in prison for 2 counts of murder. He would be eligible for parole about halfway through his prison sentence. To make things even crazier, the Evans family forgives Jake for his actions, after claiming that he would never murder again and he understands the consequences of his actions. His family fully believes him and supports him. These stories I'm about to tell are some of the worst plane hijackings in history. And let's start off with Indian Airlines flight IC-814. This first hijacking lasted for 7 whole days, during which one of the passengers was brutally stabbed to death and then had their body thrown out like trash. It's December 24th, 1999. A seemingly normal day. And we're here at Tribhuvan International Airport in Kathmandu, Nepal, with 179 innocent passengers and 11 crew members ready to take their nice 2-hour flight to, well, New Delhi, 1639 IST. Indian Airlines Flight 814 was in the air. Just like the start of any other flight, the flight attendants were going down the aisles serving each passenger with complimentary refreshments, not knowing that they had just served the passengers who were going to take this whole airline down. 5 men, starting with Ibrahim Attar, Shahid Akhtar Sahid, Sunny Ahmed Kazi, Zahur Mistry, and Shakir were on board IC-814. These men were members of the Harkat-ul-Mujahideen, a super well-known terrorist organization that had ties to the likes of Osama bin Laden. One of the hijackers, wearing a mask, holding a revolver and a goddamn grenade in his hands, got up from his seat and followed behind Anil Sharma, one of the flight crew members, to the cockpit of the plane, 1653 IST. Now the hijacker has the revolver aimed at Captain Davy Sharon's head from behind. All of a sudden, he feels a gun pressed against his head, and a random voice from behind saying that this flight is being hijacked. And guys, we'll get into the demands of the hijackers a bit later. But it only took 3 minutes for the Delhi Air Traffic Control to catch wind of what was going on. They managed to send out a distress signal alerting the authorities of the hijacking. In the main cabin, the other hijackers got up from their seats and demanded that the crew take away the food that they have served to the passengers at the beginning of the flight. The crew members didn't know what else to do, so they complied. The hijackers then went from seat to seat down the aisle, screaming and demanding that all of the men be separated from the women and children on the flight. They also ordered that all passengers wear blindfolds. And like you would expect, the passengers were absolutely terrified at this point. Many of them hesitated to follow orders, which is when the hijackers looked at them and threatened them with explosives if they questioned anything that they were saying. The hijacking was going according to plan. Well, at least the hijackers thought. 1804 IST. In the cockpit, the captain grabbed his radio and begged the Indian Air Traffic Control to convince the Pakistani Air Traffic Control to let them land. Why, you may be asking? Because the Pakistani ATC refused permission for the plane to land in Lahore. The problem was that Indian Airlines Flight 814 only had 1 hour of fuel left, which meant that this whole plane was about to come crashing the hell down. Unfortunately, the hijackers overheard the captain talking to the Indian ATC. The men took action to this and began to threaten that they would execute 10 passengers if the plane landed in India instead of the Pakistani airspace. The hijackers hesitantly allowed the captain to land the flight at the Amritsar Airport, an Indian airport that is close to the Pakistani border. 1844 IST. The plane starts its descent towards Amritsar. As soon as the plane landed, the captain quickly grabbed the radio and requested that the refueling be done as quickly as possible. The captain turned to the hijackers and handed them the radio, begging them to say something. But guys, they refused to communicate with the local police. Almost 30 minutes went by and the plane was still not refueled. The pilot turned to the hijackers and could see them visibly getting upset from the delay. But their response was anything but normal. They turn around and storm out of the cockpit into the main cabin. They walk over to the passengers and aggressively pull 7 of them out of their seats. Then they drag these poor passengers to first class, shoving them into the seats and tying them up. 2 of the passengers were Satnam Singh and Rupin Katyal. Then, without any hesitation, the hijackers pulled out a knife. They brutally stabbed both of them in the chest. I mean, seriously, repeatedly stabbed them. Katyal slowly but painfully bled out in his seat as his blood sprayed everywhere, gasping for air as his lungs filled with blood. And in just a few minutes, he was pronounced dead. He was forced to leave behind his wife Rachana, who was actually on the plane with him. Just sick. The hijackers stormed back into the cockpit, declaring that they have just killed some passengers on board. In a panic, the pilot picked up the radio and made contact with air traffic control 4 times. Screaming that the hijackers had already started killing the passengers, he even threatened to take off from the airport without the refueling, if it meant that it would save the lives of everyone on board. He was terrified but willing to try and save these innocent people. A refueling Bowser was finally dispatched, but it was initially parked to the side. As the plane moved, it was ordered to block the plane from being able to take off. Here's the thing, the hijackers knew that the refueling process would prevent them from taking off. So they turned to the captain and angrily pointed their revolver to the back of his head. They seriously demanded that he takes off immediately. Keep in mind, in first class, 5 passengers were still in their seats with their hands bound, hoping and praying that this whole situation would end soon. Just take a second to imagine how horrified they must be. The hijackers are threatening that they would execute these passengers in first class if the plane didn't take off right now. Again, trying to save the lives of the innocent passengers, the captain listens, despite receiving no clearance to take off. (1947 IST). Captain Charan is distraught. Did he save the lives of the passengers, or did he just unknowingly kill everyone on board? He radios air traffic control.
We are all dying.
The plane was headed to Lahore. Now, if you remember from earlier, the Pakistani ATC had already denied IC-814 from landing in Lahore. But that didn't stop the captain from picking up his radio and hoping that this time it would be different, because a man on board had already died. And well, they were denied again. The plane flew over the Lahore airport and the hijackers looked outside the window, beginning to fill up with rage, as they saw the lights and navigational aids suddenly turn off, preventing them from landing safely. The fuel was running dangerously low. The captain instantly regretted not allowing the plane to refuel, realizing that now he might have to attempt a crash landing, potentially killing everyone on board, including himself. With fear in his eyes, he looks down at the highway near the airport, accepting the fact that the plane would crash multiple cars, most likely killing innocent drivers. The plane is about to make an emergency landing when suddenly, the Pakistani ATC turned on the lights and navigational aids, allowing the plane to finally land at the airport. Whew. 2001 IST. Indian Airlines Flight 814 lands in Lahore. And just as the plane lands, suddenly the runway lights went out and the hijackers realized that they have just been tricked. Why? Because without the lights, the pilot couldn't take off from the airstrip. As the hijackers rushed over to the windows to see what was happening, the Pakistani forces surrounded the goddamn plane. Yep, they were completely trapped. The hijackers started to panic, realizing that their plan had just become unraveled, which is when they finally agreed to release some women and children that were on board. But this time, the Pakistani authorities denied them permission to release anyone. The plane was then refueled and allowed to leave Lahore. 2232 IST. Inside the cockpit, the hijackers demanded that the captain fly to Kabul. However, there was one major issue. When the captain radioed to request permission to land in Kabul, he was informed that the Kabul airport lacked night landing facilities. He sets the radio down and turns to the hijackers and pleads to them that it's not his fault. As the plane flew more west, almost every Gulf country closed their airspace, preventing the plane from landing anywhere. The captain thought that this was it. He had no words. The passengers were crying while holding each other, terrified, not knowing what would happen next.
IC-813, you were all cleared to land at Al Minhad Air Base in Dubai. Over.
December 25th, 1:32 IST. The plane has landed in Dubai. This time, the UAE authorities wasted no time and they demanded to speak with the hijackers. The demand was the release of 27 passengers in exchange for fuel. Like you would expect, the hijackers caved in because they just didn't have any fuel. The dead body of Katyal and injured passengers like Satnam Singh were also released. Alright, even though the plane was now in Dubai, the Indian authorities wanted to attempt a rescue by Indian forces, but the UAE authorities refused permission. They didn't want to get into a dangerous situation. The UAE authorities then sent catering trucks to feed the passengers inside, and to also further delay the plane from taking off. But guess what? These hijackers didn't even care about feeding the passengers, and they decided to let them go even longer without goddamn food. These poor, innocent passengers haven't eaten in hours, all while being held hostage. So then the hijackers turned to the captain, pointed their gun behind his head, and demanded that he takes off. This time, the captain thought that he should crash the plane into a building on the runway so that the plane couldn't physically take off. Just as he was about to crash the plane, he remembers that the plane was filled with fuel and the whole plane could explode, literally disintegrating everyone on board and everyone around. 6:20 IST. The airplane takes off from Dubai. The hijackers decide it's time to head to their final destination, Kandahar, Afghanistan. Now, here's where things get even sketchier. Remember, this is 1999. Afghanistan is under the rule of the Taliban, and the international community isn't exactly on good terms with them. But for the hijackers, Kandahar is the perfect place to hunker down. With the Taliban in control, they're pretty much untouchable. When the plane lands in Kandahar on December 25th, the Taliban steps in, offering to mediate negotiations between the hijackers and the Indian government. Yeah, right, Taliban mediators, that's like asking a fox to guard the henhouse. But India doesn't have much of a choice. The plane is now in a hostile territory, and any military action could lead to a massacre. So over the next 5 days, the situation drags on. The Indian government is scrambling to find a solution, but the clock is ticking. And the hijackers are growing even more dangerous with every hour they have to wait. And of course, food, water, and other resources are running low. Let's just say the tension is rising. And well, the hijackers made it abundantly freaking clear. Either the Indian government meets their demands or more people will die. Back in India, the government is facing an impossible decision. The hijackers want 3 militants released from Indian prisons. And these weren't some small-time criminals. Like, this isn't some free my boy, he didn't do nothing wrong. No. These were dangerous men. Like full-on terrorists. And their release could lead to even more terror attacks in the future. But on the other side, refusing to comply could mean the deaths of 149 innocent people. Their time was running low, the clocks were ticking. By December 31st, the Indian government was out of options. After nearly a week of negotiations going back and forth, they make the impossible decision to give in to the hijackers' demands. In a controversial move, they agreed to release 3 violent and notorious terrorists: Maulana Masood Azhar, Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh, and Mushtaq Ahmed Zargar. These men are flown to Kandahar where the swap goes down. As the prisoners are released, the hijackers let the remaining hostages go. The passengers, some of whom are barely alive after days of captivity, are finally free. For nearly a week, they were held hostage as they watched each other suffer in terrible conditions. They were terrified, hardly ate any food or water, and didn't know if they would even survive this whole situation. And guys, the hijackers, on the other hand, slipped away and were never caught. So what exactly happened after the dust settled? Well, for one, those 3 released militants didn't exactly go on to lead quiet lives. Maulana Masood Azhar went on to found Jaish-e-Muhammad, which has been responsible for multiple terrorist attacks in India, including the 2001 Indian Parliament attack and the 2019 Pulwama attack, which killed 40 Indian soldiers. As for Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh, he played a key role in the 2002 kidnapping and murder of American journalist Daniel Pearl. The decision to release these militants sparked a national debate. Has India done the right thing by negotiating with terrorists? Or had they set a dangerous precedent? Who's to say? I mean, I just know that I wouldn't want to make that call. Boxheads, in the comments, tell me what you would have done. Next, we have Aeroflot Flight 3739. This next hijacking is about a family who tries to escape from the Soviet Union, but their hijacking results in the deaths of 9 people. It's March 8th, 1988. Aeroflot Flight 3739 is sitting on the tarmac at Irkutsk Airport in Serbia. The plane is preparing for a short flight to Leningrad, which is now called St. Petersburg, Russia, by the way, for anyone that was curious. And honestly, this day was nothing special. I mean, it was just another typical day in the Soviet Union. It's supposed to be an easy flight for the 76 passengers and 8 crew members on board. I mean, this plane included families, flight crew, and unfortunately for them, a group of hijackers. Little did anyone know this routine flight was about to spiral into a disaster that would end in bloodshed and became one of the most infamous hijackings in Soviet Union history. However, it wasn't just about the hijacking or getting control of the plane. It was more about the desperation from the hijackers. They wanted to escape so badly and gain their freedom from the Iron Curtain Soviet Union, who had control over the lives of millions of people in the USSR. Let me explain that some more before we get into the hijacking details. It's important. We're in the late 1980s and the Soviet Union is going through what you might call a rough patch. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev's reforms are shaking things up in ways the country hasn't seen in decades. On paper, it sounds nice, opening the government, giving people more freedom, and allowing for some economic reforms. Because, you know, communism. But in reality, the USSR is a tightly controlled, authoritarian country where people don't exactly have the freedom to come and go as they please. You must get a written approval to take a dump kind of stuff. And so that's where the hijackers come in. Meet the Ovechkin family, with the most Russian names ever. Vasily, Dmitry, Igor, and Alexander, and 7 other siblings. They played music and they were actually in a band together. That will be important soon, I promise. And they were the kind of family that had no intention of just sitting back and watching their lives waste away under the Soviet rule. They wanted out so badly, but let's just say the Soviet Union didn't exactly make it easy for them to just pack up their bags and leave. So the Ovechkin brothers came up with the plan. Hijack a plane and use it to escape to the West. You know, the free people. And they weren't exactly doing this alone. They roped in their younger siblings and even their mother to be a part of the grand escape. Yeah, you heard me right. Mama Bear was on it too. Yeah, Mom, we know Mother's Day is coming up. We signed you up for an all-inclusive spa. Here's the catch. It's not in the motherland. Grab a gun. It's March 8th and the mother along with 10 children of the Ovechkin family have boarded Aeroflot Flight 3739. The flight then takes off at 12:40 p.m. There are 76 passengers on board, so it's not completely full. The flight takeoff is fine, everything's going smooth sailing for the passengers and nothing suspicious seems to be happening. Yet. Passengers sit in their seat, read a book or something, or whatever the hell you do in the 80s on a plane. The Ovechkin brothers start looking around the plane nervously, knowing that they were about to turn this peaceful flight into a whole ass shit show. They were waiting for their moment, and for about an hour they decided that it's almost time for action. They whisper amongst each other and it probably went something like this. Bro, you ready, bro? Yes, bro. I'm ready, let's do it, bro. Get it? Because they're brothers? Anyway, I need you to listen to this because it's pretty damn crazy. Once they were all ready, they grabbed one of their instrument cases and unzipped it. They pulled out a double bass, a musical instrument if you didn't know. And then the brothers grabbed sawed-off shotguns and explosive devices. Yep, from inside an instrument. The brothers hid weapons inside a double bass before boarding the flight. After all, the family was in a band together and they were kind of known locally. So the security at the airport let them through with the big-ass instrument case. The Ovechkins are now armed and dangerous, holding shotguns and grenades. The passengers start to notice those weapons and, well, panic ensues. The Ovechkins quickly get up from their seats and rush to the front of the plane. They barge in, aiming their weapons at the flight attendants. One of the Ovechkins then hands a note to a nervous flight attendant. Let me tell you what the note read. Proceed to London, do not descend. Otherwise, we will blow up the plane. You are under our control. The flight attendant nervously holds the note, shaking and scared for their life. In a panic, they sprint to the cockpit and warn the pilots of the danger everyone is in. Alright, so the hijackers' goal is to divert the plane to a Western country. Specifically, they want to land in London or Sweden. Anywhere that was far, far away from the Soviet Union. The flight crew was caught off guard but tries to keep calm, knowing full well that the Soviet policy doesn't allow for much wiggle room when dealing with hijackers. I believe their policy is get good. But with the Ovechkins armed and dangerous, the situation in the cockpit is quickly spiraling out of control. The Ovechkins are aiming their shotguns at the flight crew, making their demands known. They are desperate to leave the USSR and will do anything to get somewhere else, like hijacking a goddamn plane filled with innocent people. The hijackers believe if they can get the plane over the border, they'll be home free, embraced by the West as political refugees. But here's where things start to go sideways. The Soviet authorities, now fully aware of the hijacking, aren't about to just let this plane full of citizens land in a Western country, no matter what the hijackers want. The pilots keep flying west, but soon they see that Soviet fighter planes are following them in the sky, with an order to shoot the plane down if it crossed international territory. Yeah, these guys are literally insane. They would do anything to stop their citizens from escaping. At this point, the plane is headed towards Finland, or at least the hijackers think so. In reality, the pilots are flying to a Soviet airbase, Vovchenko, in an attempt to avoid international conflict. However, planes need this little nifty thing called fuel, and it was running out. With their low fuel levels, they're not going to make it to Finland. But the Ovechkins don't want to give up. With the guns pointed to the pilots' heads, they continue to threaten the crew, insisting they head west. More like desperately begging. However, it becomes clear that time is running out for the Ovechkins. Here's the thing about the Soviet Union in the 80s. They didn't exactly negotiate with terrorists or hijackers, or anyone for that matter. As the plane gets closer to Leningrad, the Soviet military is already putting together a plan to storm the aircraft the moment it lands. At this point, the passengers are on edge, aware that they're caught in the middle of a deadly situation. And the Ovechkins, they're getting more frantic, knowing that their plan is quickly falling apart like a Jenga tower. As the plane descends, the Soviet special forces are on the ground and are visible outside of the plane windows. They're waiting for the plane to land. I'm sure the passengers inside the aircraft were ecstatic to see that this whole situation would be put to rest. But the hijackers, yeah, not so much. The plane gets lower, lower, and lower, and they finally touch down in Leningrad. The plane lands in Pulkovo Airport, where the KGB, which ladies and boxheads is kind of the Soviet Union's version of the CIA, has mobilized elite troops to handle the situation. These aren't your average security guards. They're highly trained soldiers ready to storm the plane and end the hijacking by any means necessary. The Ovechkins start to panic as they realize they are completely trapped in the plane. Nowhere to go, nowhere to hide from the KGB. With no other options, they give an ultimatum. If the plane isn't refueled and allowed to take off again, they'll start killing the hostages. But the Soviet authorities aren't budging. In fact, they cut off all communications with the hijackers, basically playing a game of chicken with them. The Ovechkins are in and over their heads, and they know it. At 9:45 p.m., after hours of waiting, the Soviet special forces storm the aircraft. What happens next is just pure chaos. As the troops board the plane, the shooting starts. The Soviet military exchanges fire with the Ovechkins and their shotguns. Realizing the end is near, the Ovechkins continue firing and try to detonate their homemade grenades. The frantic passengers are caught in the crossfire. They scramble around the plane to protect themselves from the gunfire and the sudden explosions. Those poor people were definitely in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's a bloody, terrifying scene. Between gunshots and an explosion, bodies of the innocent hostages are dropping to the ground, injured and bloody or choking on the thick smoke. Minutes pass and the brutal shootout finally comes to an end. The dust from the explosion clears and it finally seems safe for the Soviets to move in. To their horror, they spot 4 innocent passengers lifeless on the ground, covered in blood and horrifying wounds, including 2 children. As for the hijackers, well, 5 of the hijacking Ovechkins had died in the shootout. while the others survived. Most had to kill themselves during the exchange of gunfire, not wanting to face the consequences of their actions. But ladies and boxheads, Olga and Igor Ovechkin had survived. These two remaining hijackers were tried and sentenced to 6 and 8 years in prison. Alright, here's where things are a little bit, weird. After she got out, Olga was then beaten to death by her boyfriend. Man, this whole thing is just a brutal end to a desperate attempt at freedom.